In less than an hour, the first polls in Texas will close in the bitter Republican Senate runoff between State Attorney General Ken Paxton and four-time incumbent, current Senator John Cornyn. Now, Donald Trump threw his support behind Paxton despite more than a decade of scandals, including a 2023 impeachment and acquittal by the Texas state legislature. That could be enough to push Paxton over the edge, setting him up to face Democratic nominee James Tallarico this November. MS Now national reporter Rosa Flores joins us now from Austin, Texas, where Cornyn is expected to speak tonight. Rosa, what is the mood?
Simone, the mood is very interesting. I think the pictures tell the story, so I want you to walk with me because this is the hallway outside the room where Cornyn is expected to speak. You saw some of the cameras. Now, I want you to squeeze here with me. Think tight thoughts because it's a very small room. You can see that there are political signs. And there are more than a dozen cameras here. You can take a look. There's room for about 50 chairs, and you can see the podium where Cornyn is expected to speak later today. But again, it's very tight. It does not scream Texas-sized party. It does not scream Texas-sized room, Simone. But then again, here we have a little more air conditioning. I did ask the senator's campaign if there was a different room where perhaps supporters are waiting for the senator or where the senator is going to be mingling with supporters. I was told that he is going to be waiting for the results privately. So again, this is where we're expected to hear from Senator Cornyn as soon as the results come in. Again, Simone, it was a little tight in there, not screaming Texas-sized.
It was very tight, Rosa.
Yeah.
MS Now's Rosa Flores, thank you very much. Joining the conversation now is Texas Democratic Party Chair Kendall Scudder. Cornell Belcher is still with us. I'm glad Rosa told us because my follow-up question was, well, is there somewhere else? But I guess not.
Yeah, that's a good question. Is there somewhere else? Kendall, welcome to the conversation. You know, look, tonight is one of those nights where, you know, Republicans in another universe would have a lot of energy, a lot of momentum. I don't see it. I don't feel it. I see a lot of that energy and momentum right now resonating among Texas Democrats and independents who have a different state of mind about this election. What's your assessment so far as you're looking at you know, the old Republican Guard, if you will, of Texas, kind of fold under the weight of Donald Trump and Paxton, who, you know, even Republicans say is corrupt, a criminal. His wife said, you know, hey, there are biblical reasons not to be with him. How are you seeing this race tonight?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that this George W. Bush Republican infrastructure in Texas is dead. Mm-hmm. And John Cornyn was a creature of that. He sold out every inch of his integrity to coddle to Donald Trump, and he's left alone in a really sad room with nothing but reporters on election night. I mean, the fact that these Republicans refuse to stand up to a man that'll sell them out in a quick minute, it's just shocking. And so here we are. It's really a sad story of a man who's been in public office since before I was born, whose now career has ended as he just groveled at the feet of a dictator.
Well, it is interesting to me, Michael, because so much of this dynamic sort of secondarily is going to become about money and about the fact that now national Republicans are going to have to spend money. I mean, if Paxton, I mean, honestly, I think regardless of who wins, but certainly if Paxton wins, national Republicans are going to have to spend money in a race, which will mean they cannot spend that money elsewhere. And so, yes, tonight we're talking about Texas, but this has ripple effects all over the country.
Oh, it's huge, Alicia. It's huge. The amount of money that was already spent, Cornell, in this primary is redunculous.
I wish I was working in it.
I know, me too. Me too. We could have teamed up and covered both sides of that coin. But the reality of it is very much to Alicia's point, one where you've spent $30–40 million in a Senate campaign, probably a lot more probably when you look at all the ancillary dollars that you don't see reported up front. How do you see the back end of this going into the fall? Tellerico has a connection, I think a genuine connection with Texans across the board. Certainly the hardcore MAGA Texans, no. But those Bush Texas, the chairman we're talking about? Yeah, I mean, very much so. I think they're going to be in play this fall.
Well, look,
the money.
Well, the money, man, we could have cleaned up down there. Listen, if you step back from this and look at the enormous amount of money that's already been spent in Texas, it's mind-boggling, and that's just on the Republican side. And one of the things that is, money isn't everything, but it's a lot. And and by the way, that's not a room where an incumbent who thinks he's going to win. Right, an incumbent who thinks he's going to win is not in that little tiny room, and close to 90% of incumbents win re-election. That's why open seats are so important. So regardless of what happens here in the long run, Republicans are going to have to spend a lot more money in Texas than I think they thought they would have had to if the incumbent is there. I think we have a great candidate in Tallarico, but it's an open seat opportunity in Texas that every Democrat would dream of, as opposed to running against the incumbent who has built-in advantages. And now you have a party in Texas that's divided, and they're going to have to spend a lot of money there, and money that they're not going to have to be able to divert to other places in other Senate races. And Democrats now have a Senate map. And again, a couple months ago, I think we both were weary of this idea that...
Not me. I called it a year ago. So.
I was worried. We were worried about the idea that the Senate was in play. The Senate is absolutely in play now because Senate Democrats now have more opportunities to pick up seats than they thought they would have at the beginning of the year.
Hey,
yeah,
Simone,
I think Texas is an opportunity. I think Mississippi is an opportunity.
2028 Texas battleground state.
You know what? When I was a young Democratic operative, we used to always say that Texas was about to be, it was just a couple cycles away. But maybe Chairman Scudder, it is not that far off. We shall see. And I think the next, 5 to 6 months are going to help put that on the table for us. We've been talking about the money. I just want to note the New York Times says nearly $130 million was spent. $22 million was spent for Senator Cornyn since March alone.
Right.
$22 million since March alone. That is insane. That is the money for the runoff. Let me just say this. I remember all of the things people like myself said about Donald Trump in 2015 and 2016. That, these traditional Republicans, they wouldn't want to support him, that he's got a lot of baggage, that he's the kind of person Hillary Clinton, should want to run against. And then we all know how that song ended up. And then a similar thing, frankly, I think happened in the lead up to 2024. Folks are like, oh, all the baggage, da-da-da-da. And Donald Trump has now been reelected as president. I think what people forget about Ken Paxton is that during the Biden administration, when all of those attorney generals were lining up to challenge all of the things that Joe Biden was doing and trying to stop his agenda, specifically when it came to student loan reform, the attorney general that was leading the charge for a number of those things was Ken Paxton. So I think that this is going to be a little bit more of a fight, even with all the baggage that Ken Paxton has, if he ends up winning, right, for the Tallarico campaign, Mr. Chairman, because there are a lot of folks, as we've seen in past history, Republican voters that may not like some of the personal things, right, that the candidate does, but they end up voting for them anyway. But you're down there in Texas. What say you?
I mean, anyone who says this isn't going to be a fight is just being silly. I mean, just because they have a deeply flawed candidate does not make this a cakewalk. Democrats haven't won in Texas in over 30 years, right? But I will note that $130 million that they spent just for Republicans, talking to Republicans, they're still underwater on issues in Texas because Texas is adversely impacted by the Trump administration, whether it's the imports of Argentinian beef or outsourcing the jobs of Venezuela or of oil field workers to Venezuela, or the tariffs, where the #1 trading partner in America with Canada is San Antonio, Texas. We are directly impacted in a much larger way than other states, and we're feeling it. I mean, people at the bottom feel stuck there, and no one's fighting for us. No one's giving us a seat at the table. You know that Ken Paxton's never going to do that. He's a creature of this swamp, okay? And he survives in it. He thrives in it. But you look at people like James Tallarico, a public school teacher in the seminary. We have a criminal literally running against a choir boy. And so it's a really interesting dichotomy here, but it's not just about tearing them down. I hope Democrats have learned that lesson from the last few elections. It's about delivering a message for people that they can believe in. making sure that we're not just talking about preserving Social Security, but expanding it, not talking about you getting to see a doctor when you're sick, but you getting to see a doctor before you get sick. Big, bold, progressive ideas that change lives for working class people. Texas Democrats have a history of delivering that, and I hope that James Tallarico stays true to that message, not just tearing the other guys down.
Kendall Scudder, chair of the Texas Democratic Party, in a room that seems to be bigger than Senator Cornyn's victory party, and Cornell Belcher. Thank you both so much for being with us. Ahead, the Trump Justice Department trying to erase information detailing the prosecutions of January 6th insurrectionists. Ankush Kadori is at the table next on the Weeknight.
That does it for the weeknight. We will see you back here tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern to break down the results of tonight's Texas Senate runoff. Be sure to follow us on social media at Weeknight MS Now. But don't go anywhere, because All In with Chris Hayes starts right now.
Tonight on All In.
I have so much respect for the president and so appreciate his endorsement, and I think it creates a slight bit of momentum.
Primary day in Texas is here again.
Ken Paxton's flaws and the baggage he brings to the general election is going to be exploited to the fullest by James Tallarico.
Tonight, as polls begin to close, the high stakes of the Paxton-Cornyn runoff in Texas, plus how Trump's plan to redraw democracy ran into a surprise in South Carolina.
And neither my conscience nor my common sense will allow me to stop an election that is already underway.
Then, Senator Andy Kim on getting tear gassed outside an ICE detention facility, and Congressman Ro Khanna on growing frustration with Trump's corruption.
I didn't expect the corruption to be quite as, widespread as it's been, and like the self-dealing and the lining of his and his family's pockets.
But All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes, and it's Tuesday during a primary season, which means it is election night in America once again. Tonight, the marquee race is that runoff in the Republican primary for Senate in Texas, the one that pits incumbent Senator John Cornyn, who's been in the Senate for nearly 25 years, against the scandal-plagued State Attorney General Ken Paxton. Basically, all outside observers understand that Paxton's almost certainly the weaker candidate for the general election. He certainly carries a lot more baggage. He has been endorsed, of course, by Donald Trump, who thinks that Cornyn is insufficiently loyal to him. Also, he likes the fact, I think, that Ken Paxton, as AG, was one of the leading attorneys general in the country to try to overturn the 2020 election. Now, for his part, Cornyn and his deep-pocketed allies have spent over, get this, $90 million attacking Paxton in the state of Texas with ads like this.
It's voting time, so let's cut through the bullshit. Crooked Ken Paxton cheated on his wife. She's divorcing him on biblical grounds. So now Paxton's wrecking another home, sleeping around with a married mother of 7. And remember this, Crooked Ken has increased his net worth by as much as 7,000% since taking office. Now think of the Paxton dirty deeds we don't know about yet. The wife cheater and fraud, or the Texas workhorse.
A wife cheater, you say? In a Republican primary? The barrage of money behind Cornyn did allow him to eke out a first-place finish during the Texas primary back in March. But, of course, in Texas, you got to get over 50% or you head to a runoff. So here's where we are. It's runoff day. Now, the ability of Cornyn to sort of eke out that narrow win before Paxton was before the big thing that changed the race in the last few days, and that was Donald Trump's endorsement of Ken Paxton. Paxton, for his part, has spent nearly $30 million on ads. That's about a third of what Cornyn spent, making it the most expensive runoff in recent memory. So tonight, we will see if Cornyn's spending can prevent him from becoming the first incumbent Republican senator to ever lose a primary in Texas. If Cornyn wins, it would be, I think, a little surprising and certainly a major blow to Donald Trump and his revenge tour against Republicans who he views as insufficiently loyal. It will call into question the future of his iron grip over the Republican primary voters. Today, MS Now spoke to a Cornyn supporter who is already growing tired of Trump's interventions.
I think Ken Paxton's slime.
Why do you say Paxton's slime?
Look at his record.
He's lined his pockets. I think he's abused his office as AG for Texas. It amazes me that people continue to vote for him.
Trump endorsed Paxton. Did that alter your thinking of maybe supporting Paxton because Trump endorsed him, or did you feel good about defying Trump in that instance?
Trump's endorsement for anything doesn't change my voting.
Why is that?
I march to my own tune.
If Cornyn loses, however, and Paxton becomes a nominee, it would basically be a best-case scenario for Democrats. I mean, Paxton is comically corrupt, for lack of a better phrase, and he would almost certainly struggle more in a general election than any Texas Republican in recent memory. He's probably going to be the weakest general election candidate they've put up in a while. I mean, even Ted Cruz, who only defeated Democrat Beto O'Rourke by just under 3 points back in 2018, is probably a better candidate than Ken Paxton. Democratic nominee, of course, James Tallarico, would absolutely still be the underdog, but election forecasters think that a matchup against Paxton would give the Democratic Party the best odds to finally win statewide in Texas for the first time in more than 3 decades. That's exactly why Senate Republicans are so fuming at Trump for his endorsement of Paxton just a few days before the vote. Trump's intervention already cost Louisiana Republican Bill Cassidy his seat a few weeks ago in that Louisiana primary. He's basically forced Tom Tillis of North Carolina to retire because there was probably no path for him forward in a Republican primary. The latter seat could also flip to the Democrats. That North Carolina seat and the Senate Republican caucus is so frustrated, so apoplectic, so at their wits' end with the leader of their party, Donald Trump, that the leader of the Senate, John Thune, just sent them all home until next month, abruptly. They were supposed to have a bunch of votes, but he did prevent a full-on legislative rebellion against Donald Trump's slush fund for insurrectionists, which he dropped on their heads a few days before this vote as well. Ali Velshi, chief data correspondent for MS Now, has the latest at the big board. Ali, what are you looking for tonight? And when are the polls closed?
Well, they're closed, and we've actually got a lot of vote in right now. We got 13% of the vote in across the state. Ken Paxton is doing what we expected he would do with 34,000 vote lead. He's running at 58 to John Cornyn's 41. We've got about 14 counties. There's 250 counties in Texas. Got about 14 having reported in. Only one. You can see the coloration here. The dark red is Ken Paxton. The lighter red is John Cornyn. Cornyn is only winning in one district right now. This is Dallas County, in which 50% of the vote is in. And look at that. Cornyn's winning 50.7 to 49.3. Let's take a look at the counties right around that. Kaufman County right to the east. Paxton winning 67 to 33. Fort Worth County 58 to 41 for Paxton. Jefferson County 67 to 32 for Paxton. Fayette County 54 to 45 for Paxton. 57 to 42 in Williamson's County. Now, so bottom line is, Cornyn's winning virtually nowhere. You've got the Paxton vote, and you'll remember in the initial election in March, Wesley Hunt was in this race. Wesley Hunt, congressman, he's very Trumpy. It seems that most of his votes are going over to Ken Paxton, but even when you add those numbers together, Paxton for the moment is outperforming. I wanted to show you a little bit of what happened during the elections in March. What you saw was that Cornyn was ahead in some of the vote. In the early vote, he was not ahead in the same day vote. He's got to do very well today. That's not typically how it happens. So what we're looking at is if these numbers continue through the course of the night, I would say two things to you. One is it'll be a relatively early night. Number two is that Ken Paxton will probably be the nominee. The implications for the country, for the United States Senate, for the state of Texas, and for James Tallarico are huge right now.
Am I right that we've got a situation, sometimes this happens in Indiana, Kentucky, other places, where some polls are closed and some aren't closing until 9, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Right, so we can't possibly get a call in this hour, right? We're going to be looking for it. But
Most likely not, but we're filling in.
But we could get a pretty good
We can get a pretty good sense of exactly where this is going. And frankly, it's hard to see where this is not going right now. Look at the lead that Paxton has right now. Something would have to happen that's unusual at this point for Cornyn to catch up.
My understanding, if we go back to Dallas County there, which is where you got 50% of the vote in and a very, very narrow lead for John Cornyn.
Yeah.
You know, my read of the race and the demographics of the Republican primary is that is exactly the kind of county where if you're John Cornyn, you probably need to put up a 5-6 point lead.
Much bigger number.
At least, right? Because you're probably going to get your clock cleaned. There are so many small rural counties where you're, that are much more sort of hard right conservative, much more MAGA, probably the places
now,
where he's
remember,
gonna
this is a primary, so you're attracting a certain subset of people.
Yeah.
However, that said, Tallarico is polling just a little better against Paxton than he is around Cornyn for a few reasons. There are people who might have been Cornyn supporters, traditional Republicans, Texas Republicans, who just have a bad taste in their mouth against Paxton. Doesn't mean they're going to go and vote for Tallarico. It may mean that they'll stay home. So if you're Tallarico tonight, you're looking at a few things, but fundamentally one of them is that Ken Paxton winning this nomination tonight gives you a bit of an edge.
Yeah, that's probably the rooting interest of James Tallarico, of Chuck Schumer, of the Senate Democratic donors, and politicos as well. All
Lots
right,
will happen the next hour. I'll keep you posted.
All right, great. Lots coming in already. We're going to check back in a little bit, but it looks like we're getting a lot more information than I even anticipated. Evan Smith's the former CEO of the Texas Tribune, the legendary Texas Tribune, a pillar of journalism in the state of Texas. He hosts Overheard with Evan Smith on PBS, also the managing director for events at the Atlantic, and he joins me now. What are you looking for in the race tonight, and what's your expectation going in based on the fact that the thing that they feared most, the Cornyn campaign, and I dare say the Texas Republican Party establishment, happened, and Donald Trump did go ahead and endorse Paxton?
I mean, look, the conventional wisdom all day in Texas has been that Paxton's going to beat Cornyn, period. I haven't talked to anybody today who said they thought Cornyn had a shot today, probably outside of the Cornyn campaign. And maybe they're not even telling me what they really think. Here is a very telling statistic to build on what Allie had said. John Cornyn won Tarrant County, which is where Fort Worth is, a bellwether county in Texas, by 7 percentage points in March. Paxton won the early vote today in Tarrant County, which is already in by 18 points. We don't have the full vote in Tarrant County.
Yeah.
That is a very bad sign for Cornyn. This may very well be an early night. Wait for the El Paso polls to close at the top of the next hour. Don't hate on El Paso, but you're right.
Yep.
This is probably going to be an early night.
There's something I think a little interesting here. I find somewhat comical, I'll say, or bemusing. The case, as I understand it, that you get from the Cornyn folks against Paxton is that he's a serial philanderer, that he cheated on his wife and is now wrecking another home, that he's wildly profited over his time in office and abused his position in office, that he's also even been indicted and, in fact, was even impeached. And when I run through that list, I think to myself, I don't know if that's the most compelling case to make against a candidate in a Republican primary in the year of our Lord 2026 with Donald Trump as president.
Right. On the other hand, he's been elected 3 times as Attorney General, 14, 18, and 22. And it's not that Republicans voted for him not knowing who he was alleged to be. Yeah. They knew it and they voted for him anyway. The road behind me is littered with the bones of Republicans who challenged Ken Paxton in a primary running against him as corrupt. It does not work. Whether we finally reach critical mass on that in a general election in the fall remains to be seen. But the idea that Republicans would support this guy is consistent over the last 3 elections he's run and won.
There is a new, I would just ask about this case, which I saw a lot of Cornyn people talking about it, and it seems like it's gotten quite a bit of attention in Texas, which is a lawyer from Waco who was ultimately pleaded guilty to the repeated sexual assault and sexual abuse of a child, I believe an 11-year-old, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, of his son's friend. Right.
Yes, the son's friend. That Paxton sort of intervened to get a plea down to, I think it was a day, and then it was a judge raised it to 60 days. Right. This case seems like it's getting a lot of attention, and I agree with you that in some ways Paxton's a little like Trump, where everything's kind of like priced in already. But this is a new thing that's happened. The individual in question is now out, I think, of prison. I wonder how much you think that's gotten to voters.
I mean, we'll see. Republicans are on social media who are supporters of Cornyn's, I should note, talking about this every single day. Democrats are calling for James Tallarico to make this individual you're referring to into the Willie Horton of the Paxton campaign. Run hard at this particular story as emblematic of what you'll get if you get Ken Paxton in the Senate. Again, we have to see. There's so much that we do not know. First of all, let's get through tonight. But the Republicans are going to go at James Tallarico with both barrels. They think they've got a ton of oppo to run against him on. We'll have to see what the shape of their campaign looks like. The Tallarico campaign, I have to say, has so far really been more positive. It's been more of an affirmative message. We'll have to see whether he is willing to go negative.
Yeah.
Remember, Chris, and I know you do, that one of the criticisms of the Beto O'Rourke campaign was that he did not go hard enough, negative enough, early enough at Ted Cruz. We'll see if Tallarico does the same.
Yes, and I don't think anyone, when this is all said and done, will make that critique of the Paxton or Cornyn campaign about how they run it,
Right.
Tallarico. I mean, right? I mean, don't we have an expectation that it will be incredibly negative? And also, I want to ask about the money question. I mean, this is obviously wildly expensive. And part of the peak that you hear from Senate Republicans is, to a certain extent, there's a little bit of a zero-sum situation. There's a certain amount of money that's going to get spent on all these Senate races.
Right.
And they think that having Paxton means they're going to spend a lot more, and that's going to come out of some other races.
Right.
Do you think this is going to be expensive? Do you think they're right on that this will take more money to get them over the finish line?
I think it's going to be insanely expensive, and I would agree with the criticism of this in this respect. Money spent on Ken Paxton is not spent on John Husted in Ohio. Money spent on Ken Paxton is not spent on Ashley Hinson in Iowa. Money spent on Ken Paxton is not spent on Susan Collins in Maine. There is a finite amount of money that's going to be dedicated to this race. And look, the Democrats have to hit a 3-carat bank shot on a dive bar pool table at 2 a.m. to win back the majority. Sometimes that ball goes in, right?
Yes.
It is not going to be easy for them to get the majority back. But Texas is going to be a critical component of this. And if they put up a candidate who the Democrats, after 32 years of not winning a statewide race, can finally beat, that's going to be an extraordinary story.
Yes, absolutely. Evan Smith, as always, great to get your insight and expertise. Thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Coming up, a real surprise. I will admit, I was pretty shocked today. There were some rumblings this might happen, but it actually happened today from Republicans in South Carolina. We'll tell you what happened next. We have our eyes on the marquee Republican primary for U.S. Senate in Texas, the runoff, where the last precincts will close at the bottom of this hour. The race looms large in the midterm election battlefield as Republicans try to hold on to the upper chamber. There are also primaries tonight for some competitive House seats in Texas that could be opportunities for Democrats to flip those seats this fall. And there was huge news today in the battle for control of the House. Donald Trump's plan to essentially cement control of the government by gerrymandering red states to be even redder has hit some serious snags. So first of all, in Alabama, a panel of federal judges tossed out Alabama's new Trump-approved partisan map today. The court said the redrawn map, which eliminated one of the state's 2 majority black districts, was, quote, tainted by intentional race-based discrimination. Alabama's appealing that decision to the Supreme Court. And there was also a shocking turn of events in the state of South Carolina. Remember, Republicans there, at the governor's behest, they called a special session, right? Trump ordered them to do it, were pushing a similar redistricting plan on Trump's behalf. And this one would have eliminated the state's only majority-minority district, the only district held by a Democrat that's currently represented by civil rights legend James Clyburn. Well, today, this morning, that measure failed to pass in the state Senate, a House that the Republicans in that state control. And the reason was that even Republicans there, enough of them, had serious misgivings about doing this. In fact, one of them, Senator Richard Cash, pointed out the absurdity of changing the House map when today, this very day, is the day that early voting begins in those House primaries, and they just started that morning.
I can no longer support passage of this bill for one simple reason. South Carolina citizens are going to the polls today. And neither my conscience nor my common sense will allow me to stop an election that is already underway.
Maya Wiley is president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Claire McCaskill is a former Democratic senator from Missouri and an MS Now political analyst, and they both join me now. Maya, I feel like, this has been this seesaw battle and this sort of gerrymandering arms race that Donald Trump entirely started unilaterally. Democrats have attempted to respond to in kind. There's been a lot of bad news on this, particularly after the Supreme Court basically kind of, did
permission to gerrymander.
Exactly.
Even if it's discriminatory against black people.
Exactly. They got a real green light. What's your reaction to seeing the South Carolina Republicans today, for whatever reason, doing the right thing?
Well, thank goodness for the 2 C's. I'll take conscience and really common sense any day.
I thought that was a good line, actually. we can't change it on the day we're voting.
It's the only line that makes sense if you're actually just making decisions that takes voters into account. And the problem that we have here is none of this decision making is taking voters into account. It's taking only into account what powerful people who want to preserve their own power, how they benefit. That's all that's happening here, and they're absolutely doing it, as we know from Alabama, as we know from Louisiana, as we know from other states. Sadly, this includes South Carolina, where there has been intentional gerrymandering to weaken the ability for black people. Look, we're talking about 1 out of 4, 1 out of 3 people from many of these states we're talking about as a percentage of the population who don't even get to send somebody to Congress that is going to be accountable to them. That's not common sense, and that's not about anything that should be considered conscience.
Yeah, that point about, like, well, what about the voters and all this has weirdly been lost, partly because I think of how ruthless Trump has tried to push Republicans to be. Claire, your own state of Missouri was one of the first states to sort of jump on this bandwagon. They did redistrict 1 seat away from Democrats, if I'm not mistaken, towards Republicans. What do you think about the developments today?
Well, first of all, the seat they took away was also an iconic black congressman, Reverend Emanuel Cleaver, who was the former mayor of Kansas City and, frankly, kind of a legend in our state. And it is, it has a ripple effect. And the thing I think we've got to realize here is it's very depressing what is happening. And it is very irresponsible of these folks to think that black voters in America aren't paying attention and don't understand what's going on. And when you break up a heavily Democratic district, those voters go somewhere. And where they go is to districts that now are not so red. And whether you're talking Texas or whether you're talking Florida or even maybe in Missouri or other states, when you force people out of a district that they belong in and put them in a red district, you motivate them. You motivate them to vote. You motivate them to participate. And I think that's one of the things those South Carolina senators were thinking about today, is all of a sudden their districts maybe wouldn't be as safe as they have been. And I think this all may come back to bite these folks where it should.
I want to read this from the South Carolina Daily Gazette today. South Carolina early voting begins, and again, it began this morning, I believe, at 8:30 local time, with record-breaking turnout. Many voters say redistricting is why. As of 3 p.m., 44,600 people had voted in person, nearly doubling the previous record for a single day of early voting in a primary election. Also, Congressional Black Caucus has been attempting to find places to put leverage and pressure on these states to get them to back off. Mississippi, at this moment, remains kind of a question mark. Are they going to do it or not? They have one, like South Carolina, 1 seat, majority-minority district. Congressman Thompson there in a state that's very black. Congressional Black Caucus urging companies to oppose Republican redistricting. What do you think about that as a sort of point of leverage?
Well, I call that conscience, too, and I call it calling on corporations to say, do you really care about multiracial democracy, or do you just care about you? Because we have a history, and the civil rights movement has a very recent history in 2021 of corporations coming out in support of voting rights and in support of the Voting Rights Act. That's what the Congressional Black Caucus is calling on. That's what the civil rights community is calling on. We at the Leadership Conference are making the same call. And, you know, I think it goes back to this very important point that you started with, Chris. It's that it's about the voters. It's not about the party. It's about the voters. It's about having the opportunity to be represented by someone who's actually going to do what you want them to do.
The voters right now, as we see in the column there on the side, we've got about 36% in. Paxton now to a very large lead. Of course, that's not definitive. We're not making any calls, but you can sort of see what those numbers are. You know, Claire, I was thinking of you because I wanted to get your read on this part of what happened with Paxton. It was so palpable, the just fury of the Senate Republican caucus, who has been trying so hard to not make this happen. They've been trying to keep, talk to Donald Trump about it. Tim Scott made a last-ditch effort call, and Lindsey Graham did, and all this stuff. Just how that bomb must have gone off in that conference when they found out that Trump was indeed going to go with Paxton.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, it's what he did to Cassidy, and then you've got the slush fund that he dropped on them without any warning, and you've got the ballroom, and you've got, I mean, there's a myriad of things that are making their lives miserable politically, all brought to them by Donald Trump. But the question remains, Chris, will they do anything? You know, I mean, now Cassidy will. He's a free agent, and obviously Tom Tillis is a free agent, and Lisa Murkowski runs as an independent. So there's a few, but the vast majority of them are still hiding under their desks, and it's despicable. They know better. They know what's going on is very, very bad. They know this man is not well. They know it better than most because they see it up close. And the idea that they are not pushing back harder, they may be mad, but that doesn't get us much.
Yeah, it's a good point. Although we saw kind of like a little implosion happen, right? That Claire was referring to. I mean, real implosion. Blanche came and tried to brief him, and they screamed at him, and then they, Thune sent everybody home. But they're still going to have to come back and deal with all this stuff, right? They're going to have to try to justify the slush fund after Cornyn loses his primary.
Yeah, I don't even like us calling it a slush fund. I mean, $1.8 billion when this is the same Congress that is not protecting people's ability to afford their health insurance.
Yeah, right.
When people are trying to figure out how to pay for gas and you have a president saying, I don't think about that. I mean, they have to show what they're actually doing for voters. And so rather than trying to keep people from voting, maybe they should figure out how to earn our votes.
Well, but what's happened, what's clear here, Claire, and this is why I think the Senate landscape is so interesting, right? Because there's all this kind of, angling on the House districts, right? And we're probably going to have a record low number of what's called competitive House districts, although the voters ultimately get a say about whether they're competitive or not. But I think the Senate map looks pretty interesting right now, right? Because of that, right? I mean, you can't gerrymander state of Alaska, where Mary Peltola is pulling ahead at this moment, and Graham Plattner's pulling ahead in Maine, and Roy Cooper's pulling ahead in North Carolina. And if you hold those, you need one of three, and it looks like you're going to have a Tallarico-Paxton matchup very likely that could be a real close race.
Absolutely. And by the way, I think Michigan is going to be fine. And I think Ossoff is in great shape in Georgia right now. But let's not forget there's Iowa. There's other states that are possible here. Let's not forget Ohio, where Sherrod Brown's going to need everybody's help. And I'm not saying don't help Tallarico, because he's charismatic and he's an exciting candidate for our party. And I think it'll be great for Texas. But it's Texas, folks. Let's not forget it's Texas. And they elected this guy knowing that he's kind of scummy. Yes. And by the way, our country elected a guy that's kind of scummy twice. So I just want everybody to keep perspective here and think we have to work really hard if we're going to pull this off. It's still a difficult task to get done.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a four-way parlay at this point, right? It's like the odds on that are pretty long. Maya Wiley, Claire McCaskill. Thank you both. Still ahead, New Jersey Senator Andy Kim on his pepper spray confrontation outside an ICE facility. Next. We are, of course, watching returns from the state of Texas, where there are a number of primary runoffs tonight, not just the Republican side, but also on the Democratic side. And we have a call to make at this hour in the 18th Congressional District. Long time, multi-term Democratic Congressman Al Green will be defeated by a primary challenger, Christian Menefee, much younger. Menefee running on a kind of generational change platform in that district with 61% of the vote in. We can make the call that Christian Menefee will win that runoff against Al Green. He will be the Democratic nominee in the fall. That's the first Democratic incumbent to fall tonight in the primaries. We're watching the Republican primary for the U.S. Senate in Texas tonight. Things have broken in a way that the control of the Senate potentially is in play this year. Democrats, as we were just saying, Claire McCaskill, they got to flip 4 seats to take control. Now, the most likely ones, the kind of tier ranking here, is that former Democratic Governor Roy Cooper winning against Republican Michael Whatley in North Carolina. He's ahead in the polling average there. Democratic Graham Plattner who is the Democratic nominee in Maine, defeating Senator Susan Collins in Maine. He is currently ahead in the polling average there. Mary Peltola, who once represented Alaska in the House, has won a statewide race there before, would have to beat Republican incumbent Dan Sullivan in Alaska. And in the latest polling, she is ahead of him, although they have ranked choice voting in that state that makes things a little complicated. So if you won those three and you held serve, right, meaning you win Michigan and Georgia, where you currently have senators that you need to defend, that would mean Democrats need to win one of either Iowa, Ohio, or Texas. Senator Andy Kim is a Democrat of New Jersey, and he joins me now. Senator, I feel like the conventional wisdom about 6 months ago was that it was extremely unlikely Democrats would have a shot at winning back the Senate in this midterm election. I feel like that conventional wisdom has changed, and as a senator who has a very, very vested interest in whether you're serving the majority or minority, how do you feel about it?
Well, I will say I first ran for Congress during the 2018 midterms, and the energy now is even stronger than what I felt back then. And back then, I flipped a district that a incumbent Republican who won in 2016 by 20 points. I flipped that by 1 point. So I did a 21-point flip in 2 years. So I very much think a lot of these races are in play beyond just the three that you named at the top. I think, Ohio, I think Iowa, Texas, these are all races that, we have to make sure we're pushing hard on. And look, we have to explain why it is. It's not just about the math. We cannot allow Donald Trump to be able to appoint more Supreme Court justices. Like, that's what keeps me up at night. The idea that Alito and Clarence Thomas will be pushed out, which would mean that Donald Trump would have appointed 5 of the 9 Supreme Court justices. So, I mean, like, I have seen how they have been pushing through insane candidates for nominees for judges. And I don't want that. And I don't want that for our country. I don't want that for my kids. So I think that's what we can really hit home. What is at stake in terms of Senate control?
I want to ask you about what happened at the Delaney Detention Center in New Jersey yesterday. But one more question on the Senate here, which is there was this kind of implosion that took place in the Senate, in the Republican Senate caucus that led to everyone being sent home basically for a few weeks. The slush fund, the endorsement of Paxton. What's your understanding of why they just sort of abruptly canceled votes, and what faces them when you come back? Because my understanding is they're still going to have a vote, and there's real movement behind both houses to try to do something to block this $1.8 billion described slush fund for insurrectionists or anyone Donald Trump wants to give money to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Republicans know that they're just going to continue to have to own everything that Donald Trump does. And especially when it comes to this piece of legislation to start with, a lot of the Republicans were wary about it because it is all about a blank check to ICE, blank check with no reforms or accountability when it comes to immigration. $0 about health care, $0 about helping people afford their groceries or their gas for their car, at a time when so many people are struggling. This bill was already out of touch with the American people, and then adding this $1.8 billion slush fund for January 6 rioters and others, that is something that I think has made it all the more toxic because they know that is what they're going to have to own. And that'll help us hopefully be able to further get control over the Senate as the American people just see just how extreme this administration is and how much the Senate Republicans and the House Republicans are just appeasing Donald Trump.
You were at that detention facility in Newark yesterday, Delaney, where multiple, there were protesters, there were members of the press, and there were a number of Democratic office holders, Anna Lillian Mejia, who we spoke to yesterday. That's footage of you having water poured in your eyes after pepper spray was fired. Can you just take us through what exactly happened?
I came out of the detention center and immediately saw that there was a very precarious and tense standoff, where you had a line of armed ICE ICE agents, an armored vehicle. You had a line of protesters there. And I was trying to do my best to de-escalate this. I put myself between the ICE agents and the protesters. At some point, ICE officials said they're just going to push this convoy of vehicles through the crowd. And I told them, you cannot just plow your way through a crowd of civilians. I tried to stop it, tried to find an arrangement, but they continued on. So I put myself again between the agents and the crowd. And that's when they started shooting pepper balls at our feet, as well as, right past me, seeing the pepper spray. I did my best to try to keep people safe, to try to de-escalate and keep the crowd and the agents separate. But, myself and a number of others certainly got, irritation in our eyes. My throat was burning. It was something that was really painful to watch. I mean, Chris, I'll tell you, I have to say that the ease with which it seems like violence is emerging in our streets in America, we cannot normalize this. Violence in America, it should not be easy. It should not be inevitable. And this is something that I'm worried is going to continue on in the coming days. I can't say for certain that we're past the worst of it. But this is directly related to the reconciliation bill. And I hope the American people see it next week when we're voting on in the Senate. We cannot give ICE billions of dollars more with no accountability when American families are getting nothing here and nothing to help them with their affordability crisis.
Senator Andy Kim in New Jersey, who was in that detention center yesterday in between protesters and those agents outside that DHS detention facility. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Still to come, new results from that big primary in Texas. Plus, Congressman Ro Khanna joins me right here at the table next. It's election night and all eyes are in Texas, where the last precincts are going to close in less than 15 minutes. Let's check now back in with MS Now Chief Data Reporter Ali Velshi, the big board. Ali, we've got lots of results in.
Lots.
And I think a fairly clear picture of what's going on tonight.
44% of the race in. Ken Paxton, the challenger, the Attorney General of the state, and a character unto himself, at about 63% of the vote. John Cornyn, 37% of the vote, underperforming how he did in the March primaries. Ken Paxton not only overperforming, but there were three candidates, you'll remember, in March. Wesley Hunt, very Trumpy fellow, getting 13% of the vote. Paxton's getting more than the combined vote of these two guys together. Yeah. Now, there are two counties in West Texas that are in the central time zone, so they do not close till 9, so it doesn't matter how much information we have. No one is going to make a call.
People are still voting in El Paso, the great city of El Paso.
If you were anxious about this race, I'd be sticking around the TV around 9 or 9:01 or 9:02 to determine what's happening here. Take a look. All the counties in yellow are things we don't have reports in yet. All of those, the dark red, are Ken Paxton. Those are places he's won. The lighter red are the places where John Cornyn has won. Let's look at some of these numbers. In fact, he was doing okay in Houston. That didn't happen. In Panola County, it's only a 430-point lead. Not bad there. But Dallas is a big county. He's leading by 630 votes. Look at the last time around. Cornyn led by 18,000 votes in Dallas. So there's nowhere for him to pick up enough vote tonight to make a difference. It looks like Ken Paxton is going to be the nominee. That call hasn't been made yet, but the implications for James Tallarico and this idea that a Democrat can win a statewide election in Texas after many decades may feel a little more real in about 20 minutes.
Thank you, Ali Velshi. We will, of course, be checking back in throughout the night. And at the top of the hour, I think we'll probably get an update. Congressman Ro Khanna is a Democrat of California, and he joins me now to discuss what's going on. You know, I was thinking of you because you're, I think, fair to say friend, Thomas Massey. Would you call him a friend?
Yeah, he's a friend.
You know, he was on the wrong side of Trump endorsement. He was one of, like Bill Cassidy, like a few state senators in Indiana, and now, like John Cornyn, on the wrong side of a Trump endorsement in a Republican primary. And you know, this is a pretty clear message we're seeing from Republican primary voters about who they listen to when they endorse.
It's Trump's party. I mean, this is a rout. I didn't expect this kind of numbers, but Thomas Massey was winning that race about a month in, and he won young voters by 30 points. But he said to me that all of the voters over 50 basically said, you have to be loyal to Donald Trump. Yeah, we may not agree with him on Iran, but he's still the commander-in-chief. He's the leader of your party. And the fact that Massey was unable to survive that primary just shows that this has become Donald Trump's party.
How do you make sense of, I've been asked this by a bunch of people, these sort of seemingly two competing storylines. One is Trump's power over the Republican Party is clearly, I think in some ways, as strong as it's ever been, particularly in terms of his connection to the people who choose to vote in Republican primaries.
Completely agree.
And the power of his endorsement. His general political power, I mean, he's just hit an all-time low for both terms in some polls, including after January 6th. The House, the Senate caucus just imploded in on itself and had to go home because they couldn't get enough votes together to vote on reconciliation. So how do you square those two trends?
He's losing independence. He's losing the country because he protected the Epstein class, because he's gotten into foreign wars, because he hasn't brought down prices. But he has molded for years the Republican Party and his image. And time after time, people who show any independence lose or face worse consequences. So even though he may have a more minority party, it's a Trump party. And it's a party that may be at 40%, but it's now in the mold of Donald Trump.
You just said the word, you just use it for his Epstein class, which I think John Ossoff was the one who coined that. Maybe it was you. I don't know. But I've seen a bunch of people use it. What does that mean? I've seen people critique it as either, kind of red meat demagoguery, maybe even anti-Semitic. When you say Epstein class, what do you mean by that?
I think I coined it, though I'm glad that John Ossoff used it and Robert De Niro.
You should have seen the look. If we had the shot of the congressman's face when I said Ossoff coined it.
I want Ossoff to win big. But look, here's what it means. They're a group of people who obviously committed heinous things as pedophilia and sex trafficking. I'm not saying everyone in the Epstein class is a sex trafficker, but what they did is they treated people as dispensable. And there's a bigger problem in this country of a group of people who think the laws don't apply to them, who treat the rest of Americans as dispensable, and who have hoarded an extreme amount of wealth and power. And I think what Epstein was a symbol for is groups of people who are doing extreme things, treating the rest of folks as dispensable. And that's why I came up with this idea of the Epstein class.
You mentioned the Iran war and the role that might have played in that Massey election. I think that's probably true, particularly the way the Republican primary voters think about this stuff. Someone called this the worst ceasefire ever, exchanges of weapons between the two sides. Where do you see this right now, and what do you think Congress should be doing when you get back, if it's still where it is right now?
Well, we should pass the war powers resolution. Thomas Massey and I had introduced it 2 months ago. We should have never gone into war. Obviously, the issue with the Strait of Hormuz is a creation of this war. But I'm not one of those Democrats who's on TV saying, Donald Trump, go blow up more things. Why aren't you destroying more of Iran? I'm one of the people saying, yes, let's get a negotiated settlement. Let's work towards ending this war. And the Democrats should be for ending this war and being against more of these foreign interventions. The last thing we want is to goad Donald Trump into getting us into more conflict there.
Right. You mean, are you subtly referring to comments from, I believe, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Cory Booker, and others who have sort of talked about the fact that this war has failed to achieve the degradation of, for instance, Iran's ballistic missile capabilities, and that Trump is sort of on the losing side of this?
Yeah, I mean, look, do I support the JCPOA? Yes. Should we say that in the future we need more statesmanship to get those deals? Yes. But is this the time to be saying to Donald Trump, no, you haven't blown up enough stuff in Iran? Absolutely not. And this is partly where people want a Democratic Party that's going to stand for things, that stands as the party that's anti-war. And we should be the party that says, Donald Trump, end this war. We're going to support the negotiation, and then we're going to not get into these wars in the future.
Congressman Ro Khanna, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cory Booker, I just mentioned, will be on Jen Psaki in just a little bit, so you'll get to hear what he has to say about where we are. We'll be right back. That is all in on this Election Tuesday night. The briefing with Jen Psaki starts right now. And Jen, I know you got a big call here at the top of the 9 o'clock hour. I will let you get to it.
We will get right to it, Chris. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, Chris is right, because we are ready to report a call in the biggest race of the night. It is just past 9 o'clock on the East Coast on this election night. Polls have just closed in the great state of Texas. And the Associated Press is ready to project that Trump-backed challenger Ken Paxton has defeated incumbent Senator John Cornyn in what appears to be an absolute blowout. I mean, just look at that margin on your screen. Right now, with 48% of the vote counted, Paxton leads Cornyn by about 25 points. And I just want to note here, John Cornyn is a leader in the Senate, in the Republican Senate. Ken Paxton is, when we will get into all of this, he has just defeated a leader in the Republican Senate who has basically been with Trump all along. But what this all means is that Ken Paxton will now go on to face off this November against Democratic nominee James Tallarico. It's going to be quite a race. And James Tallarico, for his part, he's expected to weigh in on tonight's results and the race ahead very shortly. And he's also going to be joining my colleague Lawrence O'Donnell live in the next hour. That will be a must-watch, of course. Now, of course, Tallarico secured his nomination all the way back in early March. And he has been basically working to consolidate Democratic support ever since. All while Paxton and Cornyn have been absolutely bludgeoning each other across the airwaves. I mean, I've worked in politics for a very long time. I cannot remember a primary race in recent history that was a bigger dumpster fire on the air and otherwise than this one. And while all of that was going on, Trump waited until late last week before deciding to endorse Ken Paxton. Real profile and courage there. Now, Ken Paxton is a deeply flawed and, shall we say, incredibly ethically challenged candidate. And honestly, that shouldn't have been a surprise, the endorsement, that is. Because after all of Paxton's many scandals, which I would say run the gamut from adultery to corruption allegations he denies to being impeached by a Republican House before he was acquitted largely along party lines, I mean, does that all sound familiar to you? It should. I mean, in so many ways, he's kind of a mirror image of Trump himself. And I'm going to dig into, there's so much more. I just really skimmed the surface there of Ken Paxton. There's a lot more to say. I'm going to dig into all of Ken Paxton's many misdeeds later on this hour, because that requires a bigger chunk of time, and we're going to give it a bigger chunk of time. But all of that baggage is part of the reason Senate Republicans spent months trying to get Trump to throw his weight behind John Cornyn, and why Trump's decision to endorse Paxton has sparked considerable backlash among members of his own party. Now, Cornyn is now the latest in a series of Republican lawmakers who have been undermined by Trump. And now those Republicans, honestly, they have zero reason to go along with Trump's agenda as they finish out their terms in Congress. We're going to talk more about that growing YOLO caucus, as we call it, and what it means for Trump's ambitions, and really, more importantly, what Democrats in the minority may actually be able to get done later in the show. But these Trump-backed primary fights are costing the party, the Republican Party, that is, a whole lot more than just a lot of headaches and lots of headaches, and party unity, which is certainly divided. They're also costing Republicans a boatload of money. I mean, an exorbitant amount of money. In Indiana, Trump challenged a group of Republican state senators, remember this, who opposed his redistricting agenda, and that Republican-on-Republican battle cost his party $13.5 million in the process. Then in Kentucky, Trump backed a primary challenge to Republican Congressman Thomas Massie, which cost his party another $32 million, making it the most expensive House primary in history. And because everything is, well, bigger in Texas, the primary between John Cornyn and Ken Paxton has now cost Republicans a whopping $128 million. That is before they even get to the general election, everyone. And nearly $92 million of that was being spent to defend John Cornyn's seat. So that's nearly $100 million that could have gone to supporting other embattled incumbents, like, say, Susan Collins in Maine, or John Husted in Ohio, or Dan Sullivan in Alaska. All are in the races of their lives right now. Instead, that money was spent running attack ads against a candidate who Trump just decided to endorse anyway. And now that Paxton is projected to be the nominee, Republicans are probably going to have to spend a whole lot more money to try to hold on to this seat. Just listen to the way John Cornyn made his final pitch to voters this morning on Fox News.
Ken Paxton will be on defense the whole time between now and November if he is the nominee. It'll take hundreds of millions of dollars to try to save him, and it's likely not to be successful. Ken Paxton will be an albatross. He could well lose, but even if he doesn't lose, he will win by such a razor-thin margin that it's likely to have a negative drag on the down-ballot races in Texas.
Look, I can be surprised. Politics is surprising. I don't think that guy is joining Ken Paxton on the campaign trail tomorrow. And he just described Ken Paxton as an albatross. John Cornyn may not be wrong. And yet Texas Republicans have just followed Trump's lead and embraced a candidate who could very well cost them control of the Senate in November. This race could swing the Senate. All right, let's get right to MS Now chief data reporter Ali Velshi, who is at the big board for us. Okay, Ali, you've been watching this. I've been watching you. I've been listening to you. You've been in all of the counties. Tell us how Ken Paxton won this race. What stuck out to you?
This is remarkable. So, as you said, the call just came in as you came on the air because there are two counties in western Texas that are in the central time zone. So no matter what you thought was happening in this race, it wasn't going to get called until 9 o'clock. The minute 9 o'clock came on, you came on the air, and it was called for Ken Paxton, 62.5% of the vote, a 204,000 vote lead with only 49% of the vote in. And that's because there's nowhere for John Cornyn to make this up anywhere in the state. Places that he won by a lot the last time around, places like Dallas County, for instance, 50% of the vote in. He won it handily in the March 3rd primary. Now it's 50.7 to 49.3. The other thing to think about when you're looking at this race is go back to March, where the primary was a three-way primary. John Cornyn won that with 42% of the vote, but it's a runoff state, so you have to get 50% of the vote. If you add up the 40.5 that Paxton got with the 13.5 that Wesley Hunt got, that was 53.5% to 42. The margin tonight is so much bigger than that. So Ken Paxton got all of the Wesley Hunt, very MAGA congressman type of votes. He got his own votes. People either didn't show up for Cornyn, or I can't imagine they changed their votes because these people really don't like each other. As you said, this was a very heated race. Bottom line, though, is what Democrats are looking at right now is the complexity of having Ken Paxton. You're going to talk about him a lot in your show tonight. The complexity of having him as the Republican candidate. Does he motivate a lot of MAGA people, or does he have a whole lot of traditional Texas conservative Republicans sit on their hands and not go out and vote because he's the Republican candidate? There are a lot of other things at play, including the money that's been spent, including the effect that Tallarico has had on Hispanic and Latino candidates who have started to swing back toward the Democratic Party. So a lot going on, but you said it very well in that this idea of Texas electing a statewide Democrat, which has not happened for a very long time. They haven't had one since 1992. I think 1988 was the last time there was an election of a statewide Democratic candidate. This is now becoming real. And remember, it felt real in 2018 with Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz. Beto O'Rourke running a very good campaign, very good candidate against a very unpopular Ted Cruz, and he still lost by 3 points. This is looking like there may be a different flavor to this. So James Tallarico and the Democratic Party looking at this result tonight, feeling pretty good about it. Donald Trump's looking at this result and feeling pretty good about it, too. It's another Trump person who he's put in and another Trump critic or somebody who's not always on board who he's thrown out of office tonight, Jen.
We're going to come back to you in the show, Ali. I'm about to talk to one of Tallarico's advisors and also Jim Messina, who ran Barack Obama's successful campaign, because there are a couple big questions here, which I'm going to get into with them. One is, to your point, do some of the more traditional conservatives, and we've seen this in some polls, who they didn't like Ken Paxton, does that stick? Are they a target? Also independents, and there are a lot of them in Texas. Really interesting. We're going to come back to you. Thank you, as always, for being there and digging into all the data. Okay, now let's turn to the two people that I have been dying to talk to. I just mentioned them. Democratic strategist Chuck Crocha is a senior advisor for the Democrat in this race, James Tallarico. Big night for him, too. And Jim Messina is the former campaign manager for President Barack Obama. Okay, there's so many things to ask you both about. Chuck, I want to start with you, and we're going to dig into the Tallarico strategy moving forward and all of that. But you know Texas. When you look at what just happened in this race, what do you think it means?
Well, tonight, Texas Republicans had a choice in this runoff. Was it crazy and corrupt, or did they support old and out of touch? And they went with crazy and corrupt, and God bless them, because a lot of Texans aren't down with crazy and corrupt. And I think folks like me who've been around Texas their entire life Republicans have had total control, Jen. I mean, total control of Texas for 31 years. And as I travel around Texas and do focus groups in Brownsville or up in Amarillo, they all keep telling me the same thing, is they're aggravated and there's this tension of their lives not getting better. Allie just talked about what's the difference between this election and 2018, up and beyond Tallarico's polling much better than Beto ever did, is this anxiety that I've never really seen in the electorate of folks just being sick and tired, God bless them, of being sick and tired.
Yeah, look, in 2018, we thought that Trump was a passing moment, and now it feels far more existential. I mean, that's one thing. Okay, we're gonna keep talking about the Tallarico strategy, but Jim, what about you? What are these? I mean, this was an absolute shellacking blowout. I don't know what you want to call it. What do you think it means?
Well, it means that Donald Trump is clearly in charge of the modern Republican Party, and he gets whatever he wants whenever he wants it in the primary. Now, the problem is that we're about to go into a general election season, and he continues to want to nominate the worst candidates. You talked about this earlier. They are spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to prop up Trump's slate of deluded Republicans here. And the question is, in the general, they will need every single dollar they can get their hands on. You know, and Jen, you talked about the turnout, and I think it's really interesting. In the elections, we've seen over 100 elections since Trump came in office. Democrats are overperforming by about 10 points. But when you look at why, it is because Republicans are not turning out in massive numbers. Their people aren't angry, as Chuck was saying. They're getting kind of everything they want. And that's with normal Republicans. You put a guy like Ken Paxton at the top of the ticket, it's not that suddenly a bunch of Republicans may vote Democratic. Maybe that happens, but probably what happens is that a whole bunch of people just don't vote. And we'll take it whatever we can get it. Because when you try to get to 50%, you'll take it any way you can get it.
That's true. You just need more votes than the other person. That's how elections work. Chuck, there's this broad perception. You sort of hear this. I feel like friends of mine will say this to me who are paying attention to this, that Ken Paxton was an easier Democrat for James Tallarico to beat. Is that true in your view?
Our polling showed that we could have beat either one of them. I think it's the difference, to Jim's point, of the electorate in the general election, and that's what I want to talk about. You said, how does he win? Well, there's a couple things going on in Texas that's really different than what we've seen in the last few of the election cycles. One is you saw this dramatic move to the right over the last few cycles with Latino voters that I know very well. Well, what we've seen in the primary was them dramatically moving back, because guess what? They don't like their aunts and uncles picked up by ICE. They don't like the gas is $4 a gallon. So if Latinos are moving back, Jim said the electorate was moving back 10 points, which is right. But Latino voters in Texas have been moving back over 20 points. And if that stays true for the general election, and you couple just a few disenfranchised Cornyn voters, that's the recipe for Texas to truly turn blue.
Yeah, the polling has showed that. Okay, I want to talk about that more, but I want to go back to Jim just for a moment, because one of the things we all know from working on campaigns is that you got to be clear-eyed too about your opponent and their capabilities, as much as they may seem crazy. And Ken Paxton is perhaps the most corrupt person on the ballot this year. I think he safely is. But what do you think? He is connected clearly with the Republican base in Texas, especially with Trump voters. He has Trump's endorsement. This seat, again, could swing control of the Senate. What do you think? This is excitement. Everybody's looking at him and they think, wow, he's crazy. But what do Democrats have to be clear-eyed about here?
That it's not about them. It's not about Ken Paxton. It's about these voters in Texas and their lives and their hopes and their dreams. You got to have a proactive message that excites people, that says you get it and that you're going to make their lives better. People are struggling out there, and they don't want to hear a bunch of negative attack ads. They want very clear ideas on how to make gas prices cheaper, grocery prices cheaper, and get along. And I think the problem Democrats got into, Jen, and you and I have talked about this a bunch, is we just thought we could hammer Donald Trump for 3 election cycles. We thought it was just enough to kind of demagogue him. And that's just not where people are. Ken Paxton has won several statewide elections in Texas, and they weren't close. So this whole theory the Democrats are saying, oh my God, we're definitely going to win because Paxton's on the ballot. I don't think that's true. I think we're going to have to win a very tough election in a state we haven't won since my senior year in college. So let's be very clear on how hard this is. Jen, sadly, I'm now a member of the AARP.
Oh, that's all right. You're owning it. I like to hear it. Okay, Chuck, I've had James Tallarico on several times, and he does not sound like a traditional politician. He is certainly not somebody who spends all of his time attacking his opponent. And he'll probably he'll have to do that, of course, to some degree here, as he has done. But what is the strategy here, to Jim's point, in terms of the balance between you have this deeply flawed candidate who you're running against? There's going to be a lot of pressure for him to go absolutely nuclear on Ken Paxton, and also at the same time talk about continue to introduce himself to voters in Texas and tell them what he's going to do in the Senate. What should people expect about what that balance is for him?
Look, when you have a winning system, you don't break that system. And James Tallarico was never, quote unquote, supposed to win the primary against the most popular Democratic politician, arguably, in the state of Texas. And what he talked about, which is really smart, and what we haven't seen in Texas is a long time, which is about bringing everybody together. If you're a Republican, you're welcome over here. If you're a lefty Democrat, you're welcome over here. If you're in the middle, you're welcome over here. However you identify yourself, this campaign is about welcoming you in, and not about left versus right, but top versus bottom. That's where the anxiety is, and I think that's why a uniquely qualified candidate like Tallarico, who's looking for things that bring us together and not the things that tear us apart, which is really different. Me and Jim's run a lot of campaigns. A lot of people have talked about doing that, but they just scorch earth like everybody else. Tallarico shows up and starts quoting the Bible. When's the last time you saw a Democrat do that just as a starting point? That's what makes him very different. He's super connected to the community and all communities, and he's going to be at all the places all the time. That's what's going to make this really different.
Jim, let's take a big picture here for a moment, because I think and we've talked about this before, but a couple of months ago, I think most of us wouldn't have said that Democrats could win the Senate back, if we were being totally honest. It feels very viable here. I can't believe the amount of money that was spent. I mean, $128 million on this race on the Republican side. Talk about the impact of that, both when you're talking to donors who may not want to spend more money, when there are other races it could have been spent on, but it should be spent on. What's the impact of that, and how do you see kind of the likelihood at this point of Democrats winning back the Senate?
Boy, you're exactly right, Jen. 6 months ago, people just said the Senate looked too far, and it was important to stay very focused. I heard this a million times. Let's just go win the House. We have to stop Trump. Let's just go win the House. And the truth is, the Senate made their own luck. They got great opposition research. They got Joni Ernst out of the race in Iowa. Maine has obviously continued to evolve. There is now, you look at the seats and you can have a really clear pathway to 50 and 51, and that's before you get to Texas. If you start putting Texas in play, Ohio, and you know more about Ohio than either two of us, so Jen can give us a little Ohio lecture at the end of this, why that's doable. Alaska's doable. I mean, the truth is you want as many shots on goal as you can get, and we now have a bunch of different shots on goal, which makes us start to think, wow, the Senate's really in place. And so if that's true and you're the Republicans, you just can't spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to prop up some of these candidates. You can't fix it. You can't have Ken Paxton and spend all this money trying to keep him from winning the primary. You can't go after Massey, who's a really big right-winger in Kentucky. You're spending money you're desperately going to need in a bunch of these races. And you're doing it just because one guy sits on his Truth Social at 6 o'clock in the morning and tweeting for the 400th time that day and decides to change the politics of his party. They are now captive of the crazy, and the crazy is the president of the United States.
Don't forget the $13 million spent on legislative races in Indiana, Jim. That was a good use of money on that side. Chuck, I have to ask you, I mean, after the 2024 election, and I'm sure you got so many calls, you talked about this a lot, I know, there was this feeling like Trump had a hold on the Latino vote across the country. It's never going to be won back. I mean, he won 55% of the Latino vote in Texas, which you know well, but for viewers out there. But in a recent poll, and you alluded to this, and this was one conducted by Texas Southern University, likely Latino voters actually prefer Tallarico over both Cornyn and Paxton, more importantly, by 4 points and 8 points for Paxton. Why do you think this how do you explain that? And how do you build on that? And what lessons can be learned for other states?
The Latino vote across the country is one of the youngest demographics. Let's start there. We're multi-generational households, multilingual. We talk many different languages, Spanish and English, and sometimes all at the same time. But what really makes us different is this fluidity of the vote, because we haven't been here, quote, literally long enough to be stalwart Democrats or to be stalwart Republicans. So when you have a candidate like Donald Trump who's outside of the system at a time when there's a lot of economic anxiety, you have a portion of that electorate, mainly Latino, who are willing to give that a shot. But now gas hasn't come down. The price of things haven't come down. And then on top of that, you're locking up grandmothers and putting them in ICE facilities. And that's a line too far. So it's the perfect storm to get these folks back. Now, Democrats, the job's not done. You have to do what James Tallarico's done, which is show up in those communities and talk about your philosophies and what you're going to do. And James Tallarico has a deep tie to the Latino community, teaching school in San Antonio, being born and raised down in the Valley. When he shows up in these communities, he knows how to speak to these communities with authentic messaging that they understand. That's the perfect storm of why Texas could turn blue, because Latinos are going to overperform, and he's going to show up in places that most Democrats are scared to go to.
Chuck is going to be on with my friend Lawrence O'Donnell in the next hour, so we'll hear all from him. Jim Messina, thank you also for joining me so much. I appreciate both of you. Okay, results are still coming in out of Texas right now. Senator Cornyn is delivering his concession speech as we speak. We're also keeping a close eye on Ken Paxton's election headquarters. We've got a lot of data to continue to dig into, and we've got so many Ken Paxton scandals to dig into because he's now the nominee. We're going to talk about all of that. I'm going to give you my take first, but then we're going to talk about all of it with Texas Congressman Greg Casar when we come back. The biggest endorsement in Texas's Republican Senate runoff today was, of course, Donald Trump's endorsement of Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton over Texas's incumbent Senator John Cornyn, which he did just late last week. There we go. But almost as notable as who did endorse Paxton was who didn't. Now, Ken Paxton's estranged wife, State Senator Angela Paxton, urged Texans to vote for a number of different candidates today, but notably did not mention her ex. So awkward. Now, if you've been paying attention to Senator Cornyn's attack ads against Paxton, and there have been some doozies in there, you might have a clue as to why.
It's voting time, so let's cut through the bullshit. Crooked Ken Paxton cheated on his wife. She's divorcing him on biblical grounds. So now Paxton's wrecking another home, sleeping around with a married mother of 7.
Now, for months now, voters in Texas have been inundated with one ad after another ad detailing Ken Paxton's 2 alleged affairs that I should say he denies. Now, there was even a musical ad, a parody of the B-52 song Love Shack. There it is. There it is, everyone, with lyrics that laid out the allegations of the affairs. And it's worth repeating, John Cornyn and the super PAC affiliated with his campaign have spent, again, $92 million on ads in this race. Now, some of those ads were just ads promoting Cornyn, but a ton of them were attack ads against Paxton. Ads that very thoroughly laid out all of Paxton's scandals. And oh boy, are there a lot of them. And boy, did they tell the story of who this guy, who is now the nominee, actually is. Now, in 2015, just 7 months into the job as Texas's Attorney General, Ken Paxton himself was indicted and arrested for securities fraud, charges he denied. He managed to delay that case for nearly a decade and ultimately settle it for just under $300,000. He didn't admit any wrongdoing in the process. In 2020, a group of his top aides, including his first assistant attorney general, sent a letter to the state's director of human resources asking the director to investigate Paxton for alleged bribery and other crimes. Now, a key allegation there was that Paxton has used his office to help a real estate developer who then hired one of the women Paxton was allegedly having an affair with. This is all part of this whole thing, guys. Now, Paxton, of course, denied those allegations, too. And all of the top aides who blew the whistle on Paxton, they all ended up out of their jobs, too. The Republican-controlled Texas State House went on to impeach Paxton for that scandal after he tried to stick taxpayers with a multi-million-dollar bill to settle a lawsuit with the whistleblowers. But Trump came to the rescue, pressuring the state Senate, which ultimately acquitted him. Now, all of that I just mentioned would be scandalous enough, but somehow, while avoiding accountability for all those scandals and while working in public office with a meager government salary, The Wall Street Journal reports that somehow Paxton has also gotten very rich. A report that a Paxton spokesperson called bogus.
While in office, Ken Paxton's net worth increased by up to 7,000%. How the hell is that even possible? Crooked Ken is now worth up to $12 million. He owns 11 homes, claiming 3 of them as his primary residence. Well, we know Ken Paxton cheats. Just ask the mother of his children.
If you want to learn about all of Paxton's alleged shady business deals, I've just given you a little flavor there. We don't have time to get into all of them right now. We will have time in the months ahead. But the John Cornyn campaign actually made an entire website about it called crookedken-.com. Yeah, there you go. Check it out. Now, as if all of those scandals were not enough, and they should be enough, there's also this.
Why does Ken Paxton go easy on child predators? A Waco attorney, Adam Hoffman, sexually abused a child for 3 years, and Paxton gutted the case, offering him just a slap on the wrist.
So yesterday, just a day before today's runoff election, that man was let out of jail after serving just 29 days. A plea deal negotiated by Ken Paxton's office had tried to give him just a single day. Now, with that many scandals, and with so many of them already laid out so neatly by John Cornyn, the question now is, how much impact will all of that have in November? This weekend, MS Now reporter Rosa Flores spoke to a married couple in Texas, one a Republican, one an independent, who had some slightly different opinions on the matter.
Your thoughts about Cornyn and Paxton?
Well, it's not a great choice, either one, really, but I think I lean towards Paxton for sure. He's local. Cornyn hasn't always been with the Republicans the way I would like, but it was it was a tough choice. But I did vote for Paxton on the runoff.
What are your thoughts about Paxton?
And crook. Yeah, that's it. Period. He's just a crook.
There you go. She's a little shorter to the punch there. Joining me now is Congressman Greg Casar, a Texas Democrat and the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Okay, there are so many scandals that Ken Paxton has been a part of. I just gave my take on the guy Texas Republicans sent into the general election tonight. What's yours? Oh, you may be muted there, Congressman. Let's see. There you go. Technology.
Ken Paxton is the most corrupt politician in America. Calling Ken Paxton just a crook is like calling Texas summers a little bit warm. I mean, the guy makes Richard Nixon look like a Boy Scout. And so we cannot allow him to become a United States Senator, but we have an incredible candidate in Representative James Tallarico, who is really bringing people together, taking on corruption, taking on Texas billionaires. And I think he is going to be the kind of candidate that can win over crossover voters, excite voters that oftentimes sit on the sidelines in Texas, and finally flip the state.
This has been, I mean, I've been talking about it through the course of the show, a brutal slugfest between Cornyn and Paxton. I mean, everybody in Texas knows they've been inundated with ads. Do you think, but Paxton came through this, despite all the ads, despite all the money spent against him. Do you think Cornyn inflicted enough damage to benefit Tallarico, or what should Tallarico be doing to kind of run against a guy as corrupt and crooked as Paxton while also telling the story of who he is?
Well, look, these May runoff elections have a notoriously small number of voters who decide them. And so what James Tallarico needs to go and do, and what he's already doing, is going and talking to the huge number, the millions and millions and millions of Texans who are going to vote in the general election that have very little or nothing to do with this May runoff. This May runoff system, Jen, if you remember, is how we wound up with Ted Cruz as a senator, who couldn't even get 51% of the vote against Beto O'Rourke. And so we have an even greater opportunity here to defeat an even more, believe it or not, even more unlikable politician. Look, you just showed the clip. It's hard to tell the full story here on TV. You've got to Google it. It's nuts. Ken Paxton was indicted by a grand jury, investigated by the FBI, impeached by his own party. You know how hard it is to be impeached by your own party nowadays. The guy is such a problem for the Republican establishment that was trying to not have him in, because he just repels all different kinds of voters. Basically, if you look up the word swamp in the dictionary, you should see a picture of Ken Paxton.
Yeah, perhaps we may at some point. Let me ask you about the Trump approach, because after Trump endorsed Paxton, Paxton kind of set his sights on campaigning against Tallarico, and we'll see what he says tonight. He's currently speaking. Our team is watching it. But he's workshopping emasculating names and claiming Tallarico is a vegan. He isn't one, by the way. But what does that tell you about this race?
They have so little on James Tallarico. The guy is training to be a pastor. He's a seminarian. He preaches and talks to us about following the 10 commandments, of which I bet Ken Paxton has broken all 10 of today. And Tallarico is building the kind of populist campaign about bringing down people's costs, making sure everyday folks have health care, the kind of campaign that people talk about wanting to bring back for Texas Democrats, that I think really has them running scared. The Republicans' own polling that they put out to try to keep Trump from endorsing Paxton showed Tallarico beating Paxton if the election were today. The election, of course, isn't today. There's a lot of time between here and November. But if all Paxton has is calling Tallarico names, then I think we have our best shot of my entire adult lifetime to flipping the state of Texas.
John Cornyn said so much this morning on Fox News. So there we are. Congressman Greg Casar.
Believe him if you don't believe me.
There you go. Whomever. Either one. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got Ali Velshi standing by at the big board. I told you we'd come back to him because results are still pouring in from across the state of Texas, including in some very important House primaries we're watching. We've got so much more to get to tonight. We'll be right back. Okay, we know that Ken Paxton absolutely blew out the race against John Cornyn tonight in that Senate primary. And we've been talking about that throughout the show. But there are also several other runoffs on both sides of the aisle in House races and statewide elections. And MS Now senior data reporter, our friend Ali Velshi, is still with us at the big board. Ali, a lot of interesting things. Big, generational race with Christian Menefee and Al Green. But what stuck out to you tonight?
Yeah, a few things have happened. Let's start with 33, Texas 33, which is in Dallas. This is a very interesting story. Colin Allred had stepped out of his role as a member of Congress in order to run against Ted Cruz in the last senatorial election. He lost that election. That district was taken over by Julie Johnson, who is now the current incumbent. Colin Allred's not in Congress anymore. So this is an incumbent, the former incumbent and the successor to the incumbent running against each other. 64% of the vote in District 33. Colin Allred leading by about 10 points. Not enough to call this race in his favor right now, but this is an incumbent versus incumbent race. Very similar situation, slightly different. Let's go to Houston, District 18. This is Christian Menefee. He has been called now as the victor here with 61% of the vote in, about an 11,000 vote lead. He's 38 years old. Al Green's 78 years old. They are both progressives, but this is a little bit generational. Interesting story. Al Green's district was sort of redistricted into a way that it was going to become a Republican district, so he decided to move over to District 18. Technically speaking, that was more of Menefee's district. Menefee has now won that. Generational, but they're both progressives. They're both on the same side of many issues. There was some argument that Al Green, there was some argument that crypto money had played a role in this. It's something that's going to become bigger and bigger over the course of this election, crypto and AI and tech money. But the bottom line is, in this generational battle, Christian Menefee, the 38-year-old progressive, is going to be the candidate going into the election against Al Green, who will be retiring at 78 years old, one of the older Democratic members, particularly progressive Democratic members. So two very interesting close races that we were watching in the Democratic side of the runoffs in Texas tonight, Jen.
Ali Velshi, it's all shaping up what the electorate is going to look like. We got a few more primaries left, including California next week. But thank you, as always, for being there and digging into all the data.
My pleasure.
Okay, we have been talking about this growing YOLO caucus in Congress, this group of Republicans that Donald Trump has successfully primaried, or people who decided not to run again, but are now basically free. They're living their best lives, free to speak their minds about him. and more importantly, vote against things that he wants before they actually leave town. And I have to say, all I have to say is, welcome to the YOLO party, John Cornyn. If you want to come, I'm sure they'll welcome you. Senator Cory Booker is standing by to talk about all of it, and he joins me next. Tonight, Texas Senator John Cornyn became the newest member of a small but growing unofficial group of Republicans we're calling the YOLO caucus, as in, you only live once. Republicans like Senator Thom Tillis, Senator Bill Cassidy, Congressman Thomas Massie, they're already members. We've already started to see them push back against some of Trump's biggest priorities. Senator Cassidy just voted with Democrats to advance a resolution calling for an end to Trump's war with Iran. Cassidy and Tillis were also outspoken about killing a $1 billion earmarked in security money for Trump's beloved ballroom. They're also pushing to eliminate the Justice Department's slush fund for Trump's political allies and supporters. It's a small club, but the YOLO caucus did get a little bigger tonight, or it could, with John Cornyn's loss in the Texas Republican primary runoff. And the irony is that one White House official told MS Now that Trump backing Ken Paxton was an intentional FU to a stalled Republican Senate. A Republican Senate Trump desperately needs to make his legislative agenda a reality. Joining me now is Democratic Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey. There's always so much to ask you about, but let me just start by asking you about this, as I'm calling the YOLO caucus. I mean, we've seen what Senators Cassidy and Tillis have done, said and done so far, both said and done. What's your gut feeling on Senator Cornyn, and what do you think together you could do with some of these members who may feel willing to work with Democrats on some of the agenda items I just mentioned?
So let's just start with the fact that what President Trump is doing is a moral outrage. From his corruption, his crypto schemes, his ballroom, the monuments to his ego, to all the kleptocracy he's doing, and many of the incompetent people he's putting in very important places. Now, it's not just a Democratic thing that believes that. Many of us have private conversations with folks who will express their disdain, their outrage in private, but do nothing in public. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm hoping is going to happen is what we saw with Senator Cassidy right before we left. I've been leading with a group of Democrats to push every week for basically for saying no to this Iran war on the floor of the Senate, forcing them to go on the record. And we've been gaining more and more people. And finally, we actually won one of those votes, which is going to force an up or down vote on the war on the Senate floor when we return. And so I'm really hoping that the next liberated person to speak their mind, to tell the truth of what they think about Donald Trump and his hurting of the American people, especially with this war, is going to be John Cornyn.
Let's hope he's invited, right, to the party to do right and do good here. What about the slush? I mean, there's a bipartisan proposal in the House. I know there are senators who've expressed concern about it. What about the slush fund? I know you're vehemently against it. Do you think there's any will there?
Yeah, look, you're seeing more and more outrage around it, more strength. But the fact still remains. We know 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when people look back at the most corrupt president in American history that torched our democracy and did outrageous things, the question is going to be, who were the people so complicit that they allowed these things to happen? And Republicans know they're going to be held accountable. They're going to be on the record. So I'm starting to see more people, as Donald Trump continues to strain our democracy and push every sense of decency. I'm starting to see some wobbly knees amongst Republicans who for too long have been doing that advanced form of yoga and bending over backwards, contorting themselves to do what Donald Trump wants. We're starting to see weakening in that. And with John Cornyn now, a free man, I hope, I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the Senate, and hopefully more people that will stand up with us when we call out these outrages.
Senator Cornyn, if you're out there, Senator Booker is going to take your call. Let me ask you about the anti-corruption message. We have talked about so many topics and issues, and you're involved in so many of them across the board. And you kind of led there with the corruption in the Trump administration. It is so outrageous to so many people. And it has become a really resonant, dominant message in so many races across the country. Why do you think that is? And how do you expect that issue to resonate in places like Texas, where we're talking about the Senate race tonight?
Well, American people are clearly hurting. Prices are going up. They're losing their health care because they can't afford it. They can't pay their rent or their mortgage and their prescription drugs and their child care. And then they look up and they see the president of the United States grifting, not governing, but being the biggest kleptocrat we have ever seen. And it is deeply, penetratingly offensive that this president, at a time when so many Americans are hurting, is concerned about his ballroom and asking taxpayers to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on it, or this marble arch that he's asking taxpayers to pay for, or even his foreign policy. So again, this is an offense to the average voter, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's a principal concern. But Jen, I want to tell you, this president is an accelerant, an extreme version, but we have normalized corruption from the Supreme Court that takes unlimited gifts from billionaires who have interest in matters, to even Congress itself, where people are trading stocks and this corporate cash flowing in. It's why I don't take corporate money, I don't take issue area PAC, and I'm trying to say that we need to get rid of corruption from all three branches that has been so normalized that Donald Trump is so taking advantage of.
Yeah, he's the maximum version, but there's a lot can be done in a lot of places, to your point. Let me ask you about some good news, because we all need some good news, right, in the world. I mean, today we got two important pieces of news related to Republicans' redistricting efforts. In South Carolina, the state Senate killed Republicans' redistricting plans, and a federal court ruled the new map in Alabama was tainted by intentional race-based discrimination. I know we can't be too rosy here. There are a lot of fights to be had, but what was your reaction to those two new developments, and where do you think all of that stands right now?
Well, my reaction is simply thank God. We actually are winning a lot of court cases. The Republicans are trying things all over the country, and more often than not, we're winning. The fact is we are still seeing the Supreme Court do things that are eviscerating, in this case, African-American representation, but the fight isn't over. I talked to Representative Clyburn in South Carolina today, one of our great national leaders, who just said, hey, not only did we win in the battle of at least this round of the battle, but what most important thing that he noted that I hope everybody listens to is that they are setting records that have never seen before, even in presidential elections, for early vote turnout. That Americans are aware of what's going on, they're angered by it, and most importantly, they're activated to go out and vote. Because at the end of the day, the court cases, we're winning more than not, but we're still losing. The big way to stop all of this is to have a massive voter turnout, to regain control from Donald Trump of Congress and begin to not only hold him accountable, but begin to pass laws that end this corrupt nightmare that we're all living in.
Senator Cory Booker, thank you as always. We have to take a very...
You and for those...
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say Delaney Hall in Newark, New Jersey, which we didn't mention, it is a private prison outrage. It should not exist. It should close down. Another United States senator was attacked. First, we saw it with Alex Padilla, thrown down, put in cuffs. And what happened to Andy Kim should ignite the outrage of everyone. And I'm sorry that private prison in our community should be closed down.
We'll come back and we'll talk more about it. Senator Cory Booker, thank you. That does it for me tonight. The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell starts right now. Hence.
Hey, Jen, you know, I've never heard Ken Paxton give a speech before tonight. I listened to his victory speech, and it was just the flattest public speaking I've seen in quite a while. He spent, it seemed to me, most of the time talking about our first guest tonight, James Tallarico. We're going to show viewers exactly what he said about James Tallarico. James Tallarico, if he hasn't heard it already, is going to hear it on this program, what Ken Paxton said about him. And this will be the first place where James Tallarico gets a chance to respond to Ken Paxton tonight. This really will be, in this hour, the campaign officially underway.
The general election is launching. This race could determine control of the Senate. So I can't wait to hear what he has to say.
General election in Texas underway right now at this hour.
Exactly.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you. Well, Texas Senator Lloyd Bentsen was one of the very few politicians in American history, and the only one who I can personally remember, who won and lost an election on the same night. In 1988, Lloyd Bentsen appeared on the ballot in all 50 states as the Democratic candidate for Vice President of the United States. And at the same time, on the Texas ballot, Lloyd Bentsen appeared as a candidate for re-election to the United States Senate in Texas. The presidential ticket of Michael Dukakis and Lloyd Bentsen got 43% of the vote in Texas in 1988. And at the same time, the same night, Democratic Senator Lloyd Bentsen got 59% of the vote in his re-election campaign for Senate, thereby making Lloyd Bentsen the last Democrat to win a United States Senate election in the state of Texas. And the next year, James Tallarico was born. He is now the Democratic candidate for Senate in Texas, trying to do something that hasn't happened literally in his lifetime: win a Texas Senate seat for the Democrats. The Texas law that allowed Lloyd Bentsen's name to appear on the ballot twice at the same time for two different offices was written by a Democratic state legislature and signed into law by a Democratic governor so that Lyndon Johnson, the majority leader of the United States Senate at the time, could appear on the Texas ballot for two different offices in 1960. And they were the same offices that Lloyd Bentsen appeared on the ballot for. On election night in 1960, appearing on the ballot with Lyndon Johnson as his running mate, John Kennedy won the presidential vote in Texas with 50.5% of the vote, while at the very same time, Lyndon Johnson won his re-election to his Senate seat by 58% of the vote. When Lyndon Johnson moved up to the vice presidency, the Democratic governor then appointed a Democratic senator to take Lyndon Johnson's place. And for some in the Democratic Party, that now distant dream of Democrats winning in Texas has never died. And tonight, James Tallarico might be the best chance the Democrats have had to win a Senate seat in Texas in 38 years. Some polls earlier this year have shown James Tallarico leading both of the then Republican candidates who faced off tonight. And now we know the Republican candidate will be Texas State Attorney General Ken Paxton, who was endorsed by Donald Trump. And joining us now, has been covering the election results in Texas tonight, MS Now's Ali Velshi. Ali, what's the latest? What's happening in some of those other Democratic primaries?
Well, Tallarico was a strong candidate to start with, got a little stronger tonight with 63% of the vote. Ken Paxton, as you have said, is going to be the Republican candidate for Senate in Texas. That's going to be very complicating for a lot of Republicans, moderates, and independents in Texas who may not vote for Tallarico, but they may sit home and not vote for Ken Paxton. A couple other races I just want to tell you about. The Attorney General GOP race has been called in favor of Mays Middleton. He was running against the Republican member of the House, Chip Roy. That one's been won. And I know you're going to be talking to James Tallarico in a couple of moments. I want to take you back to the March primary that he won. Here's what's got to happen with James Tallarico in order to win the state. There's a lot of things have to happen, but there are a few counties down in the bottom of Texas. These are the Rio Grande Valley counties. It's representative of things that go on around here, but heavily Latino, Hispanic votes that had gone toward Donald Trump and have started moving back toward Republicans. If James Tallarico can appeal to that demographic, that'll be good. Then the San Antonio, Austin column, where he needs to do well. The area around Houston, where actually he lost to Jasmine Crockett, but a lot of Democratic votes in that area that Tallarico's got to succeed in converting over to Tallarico votes. And then the Fort Worth, Dallas Metroplex and the counties around there. Again, Jasmine Crockett, that's her backyard. That's where she's from. She did very well in these districts. But again, those were Democratic votes. And remember, more Democrats showed up on that March 3rd primary than Republicans did. So there are, obviously you got to win all over the state. But if James Tallarico can win with high margins, margins in these particular areas, this will stand him in good stead. The complicating factor now, perhaps in his favor, is that Ken Paxton is the Republican nominee. That's fantastic for Donald Trump. That's fantastic for the MAGA base. It may not be fantastic for Texans in general and Texas Republicans in particular.
Ali Velshi, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And leading off our election coverage tonight is Texas State Representative James Tallarico. He is the Democratic nominee for United States Senate in Texas. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. This is the first time you've joined us where you know who you'll be running against in November. Is this the campaign you wanted, Tallarico versus Paxton? Is this the opponent you wanted out of this Republican primary?
Well, Ken Paxton embodies the broken political system that we're running against. He is the most corrupt politician in America. 3 years ago tomorrow, he was impeached by his own party for using his public office, his position of public trust, to enrich himself and his donors at our expense. And that is exactly the problem in our politics. It's puppet politicians who serve themselves and their billionaire mega donors instead of serving us. It's why we can't afford anything. It's why we can't get ahead no matter how hard we work. The system is rigged by corrupt politicians like Ken Paxton. And so it's going to be all of us. It's going to be Democrats, independents, and Republicans. It's going to be urban Texans, rural Texans, suburban Texans. It's going to be all of us coming together, the people versus Ken Paxton.
Let's listen to what Ken Paxton had to say about you tonight. And I have to tell you, I don't know if you've heard this already, but he spent a good deal of his victory speech tonight talking just about you. Here's what he had to say about you.
My opponent is the most extreme radical the Democrats have ever nominated. He's even running a vegan campaign, whatever that is. He goes by a few names that you may all have heard of. Some people know him as Tofu Tallarico. Some people call him Six-Gender Jimmy. I've even heard some people call him James Tallarico. And others refer to him simply as Low T Tallarico. But no matter what you call him, let me tell you this. James Tallarico is a threat to everything we hold dear in this state and in this country. He's a threat to our security and our safety. He wants open borders and even said a welcome mat should be at our southern border. He's a threat to our children. He wants boys and girls sports, gender mutilation surgery performed on kids. And when asked what he loved outside of his family and friends, you heard what Brandon Gill said, his first answer was trans kids. That's weird, and that's a radical guy. He's a threat to our prosperity and Texas economy. He said you can't be a Christian if you support the oil and gas industries. He wants to raise your taxes, and he won't do a single thing to lower costs for you and your family. And finally, he's a threat to our very way of life and our values. I mean, he's a vegan who thinks God is non-binary and that there's actually 6 biological sexes. It's hard to imagine someone more radical than that. No matter what he says or how much he raises, the reality is that James Tallarico is going to be nothing more than a Texas-based puppet for Chuck Schumer and the National Democrats.
That is it. That is, as of tonight, the Paxton campaign against you. What is your equal time response to that?
Well, Ken Paxton is morally unfit for office. He'll lie to you with a straight face. He's failed the character test. He's the most corrupt attorney general of our lifetime, and he puts the interests of himself over the laws of Texas. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of Ken Paxton's fellow Republicans. This November, working Texans, Democrats, independents, and Republicans alike are going to come together to defeat the most corrupt politician in America and the broken political system that he represents.
So he's going after you in very personal terms. He's calling you, he's got names for you that we just heard. I don't want to repeat some of those. But obviously, he's going to spend a great deal of his time talking about you and transgender issues and children. What do you want Texas voters to understand about that?
Well, this is how puppet politicians like Ken Paxton stay in power. You know, he's spent his entire career selling us out for his donors. And that, I think, is going to be apparent to Texans over the course of this race. And so the only way he's going to hold on to power is through distraction and division. This is the oldest strategy in the world, divide and conquer. They divide us by party, by race, by gender, by religion, by all this culture war stuff. So we don't notice that they're picking our pockets, that they are closing our public schools all over Texas. They are gutting our healthcare, raising our premiums for Texans all over the state. And they are raising taxes on all of us while they cut taxes for themselves. And so I think Texans see through this game. They realize that we're being pitted against each other with these old, tired culture war fights so that corrupt politicians like Ken Paxton can hold on to power and continue to enrich themselves and their billionaire mega donors.
What about Texas voters who want to know from you on this particular issue? Is Ken Paxton telling the truth about you in relation to these issues, especially involving what he was just talking about there, transgender issues involving children?
No, Ken Paxton is clipping comments, taking them out of context to try to paint a picture, trying to paint me as someone I'm not. You know, Ken Paxton has a criminal record. I have a legislative record over 4 terms in the Texas House of Representatives, where I've brought Democrats and Republicans together to pass more than 60 bipartisan bills to cut property taxes, to raise teacher pay, to lower the cost of housing, prescription drugs, and child care across Texas. And I'm going to put that record up against Ken Paxton's criminal record any day of the week, twice on Sunday. I've called out the extremes in both parties, on the right and the left. You know, I've called out Ken Paxton for his blatant illegal corruption, but I also called out President Biden when he failed to secure our southern border. So I'm not interested in going to Washington, D.C. to serve one political party. I'm going to Washington, D.C. to serve the people of Texas. That's the exact opposite of what Ken Paxton does. He serves himself and his billionaire mega donors at the expense of the people of this state.
You just heard Ken Paxton say that you are for open borders. What's your response to that?
I just told you that they were, clipping things that I've said. This is a perfect example because I said our southern border should be like our front porch. There should be a welcome mat and a lock on the door, meaning we can welcome immigrants who want to live the American dream, who want to make us richer and stronger in the process, and secure the border and keep out people who mean to do us harm. We can do both of those things at the same time. It's puppet politicians like Ken Paxton who want to grandstand on this issue of immigration, who want to make people afraid. That's why he's cutting my comments in half, because he wants to paint a picture. He wants to hold on to power despite his career of corruption. So we're going to keep telling the truth over the course of this campaign. And I think Texans will know who's actually fighting for them, who's fighting to lower their costs, who's fighting corruption, and it's not Ken Paxton.
It's very clear that he's going to follow the Donald Trump model in so many ways, including, by the way, his own ethical behavior, according to the public record. But you're going to be subjected to a number of nasty names. And we just heard a couple of them there that he tried out tonight. He'll be trying out more of those. And I'm sure people out there around the country are wondering, how are you going to counter that? How are you going to fight back against that? Because they've seen Donald Trump use that kind of technique successfully, especially in states with a lot of Republican voters. And as we know, Texas is one of those states with a lot of Republican voters who apparently respond to that kind of name calling and insult.
Well, I've gone to every corner of Texas already over the course of this campaign, from Beaumont to El Paso, from Amarillo to Brownsville, and everywhere in between. And I can't tell you the number of people who come up to me at the end of these events and whisper, "I'm not a Democrat," like they're in the witness protection program, including a lot of people who voted for President Trump in 2024. They voted for him because they thought he was going to lower costs. They thought he was going to drain the swamp. They thought he was going to end the forever wars. They thought he was going to release the Epstein files. But just 1 year into this administration, they've seen him do the exact opposite. They've seen him raise prices through his crazy tariffs. They've seen him grow the swamp with unprecedented corruption. They've seen him start new forever wars, including the latest war in Iran. And they saw him do everything to prevent the release of the Epstein files. And so a lot of the president's supporters in Texas are feeling disillusioned. They're feeling disillusioned with this extremism and this corruption that is embodied by politicians like Ken Paxton. And so we have a real opportunity to build a big coalition of Democrats, independents, and Republicans who are fed up with this extremism and this corruption. That's exactly how I flipped a Trump district in Williamson County, Texas, when I first got elected to the state house. It was by building that big coalition, that big tent. And this politics of name calling, of trolling and owning, that politics has a record low approval rating in this country, including in Texas. Those nicknames don't lower your grocery bills. They don't lower the price of gas. They don't lower the cost of housing and childcare and prescription drugs and insurance. It doesn't actually improve people's lives. And so I think in this election, what you're going to see is a deep hunger for servant leaders who are actually going to deliver for working Texans, going to make their lives easier and better and less stressful, rather than enriching themselves and their billionaire mega donors.
I want to go to one of the issues you would face as a United States Senator now in the Senate, and that is a vote on a war powers resolution which would limit Donald Trump's ability to continue his war in Iran. How would you vote on that?
I would vote to limit these presidential powers. I would vote to end this disastrous war in Iran as quickly as possible. You know, as a millennial, I saw how military disasters like the Iraq War robbed this nation of young lives, of billions of dollars, and of our moral standing around the world. And I think this administration is making the exact same mistakes in Iran. And so I think we need to bring this war to an end. We got to start lowering the price of gas for working Texans who are already feeling squeezed. And we got to get our foreign policy back to some kind of sanity.
James Tallarico, please stay with us. We're going to squeeze in a commercial break here. When we come back, I want to show some of the campaign ads that already have run against your opponent and that he survived, which are kind of, it's inconceivable that a candidate possibly in any other state could have survived what he's already survived as a candidate. James Tallarico, please stay with us. We'll be right back. And we're back with Texas Democratic candidate for Senate, James Tallarico. Let's look at some of the TV ads I know you've seen, because everyone in Texas has seen them. But these are the TV ads that Republicans ran against Ken Paxton, your new Republican opponent, and he survived these ads. Let's watch this.
It's voting time, so let's cut through the bullshit. Crooked Ken Paxton cheated on his wife. She's divorcing him on biblical grounds. So now Paxton's wrecking another home, sleeping around with a married mother of 7. While in office, Ken Paxton's net worth increased by up to 7,000%. How the hell is that even possible? Crooked Ken is now worth up to $12 million. He owns 11 homes, claiming 3 of them as his primary residence. Well, we know Ken Paxton cheats. Just ask the mother of his children.
Why does Ken Paxton go easy on child predators? A Waco attorney, Adam Hoffman, sexually abused a child for 3 years, and Paxton gutted the case, offering him just a slap on the wrist.
Are those important issues in this campaign?
Absolutely. There is no more important issue than protecting our children. And the fact that Ken Paxton would let a known predator back out on the streets, to me, is unconscionable. And it's going to be part of our prosecution of Ken Paxton in the months ahead. Texans will understand the choice that's before them, the choice of the most corrupt politician in America and a candidate who is running on trying to lower costs and clean up corruption. There's going to be a contrast between service and selfishness, and I look forward to making that case to the people of Texas.
Do you, based on everything you've seen, understand, can you describe how Ken Paxton so massively increased his net worth on a government salary?
I think we're going to have plenty of time in the weeks and months ahead to explain to Texans exactly how that's possible. Some of it is already known. You know, Ken Paxton was indicted for fraud. He was impeached for bribery. He has shown over and over again that he's only concerned about himself and that he's willing to use his position of public trust, his public office, to enrich himself at our expense. And again, Ken Paxton owns 11 homes while we can't afford one. Ken Paxton's net worth went up by 7,000% while our pay has been stagnant. So this is going to be the fight before us, because this is not just about Ken Paxton. It's about the corrupt system that he embodies, that he represents. If we can defeat the most corrupt politician in America in this year, in this race, in this state, then we can defeat this entire corrupt system. And if people watching are ready to join the movement that we're building, I hope they'll go to jamestallarico.com, sign up to volunteer, sign up to donate, because we're going to need everybody if we're going to defeat the most corrupt politician in America.
There's a University of Texas poll from April, now outdated, but poll in April, Tallarico versus Paxton, just isolated the two of you, and it had you running at 42 and Ken Paxton then running at 34. Now he's a winner of the Republican nomination. Now he has Donald Trump's endorsement, so we don't know what that would mean to that polling now. On the issue that we just discussed before the commercial break, Donald Trump's war in Iran, the University of Texas poll showed in Texas 49% disapprove, 37% approve. So that your position obviously is the winning position, as it were, in that particular poll, and the winning position with Texas voters. How important do you think that issue, that the war in Iran, is going to be between now and November?
I think it's going to be a very important issue. You know, Texans are feeling the pain at the pump, and it's because of this disastrous war in Iran. You know, I put forward a proposal to suspend the federal gas tax, which would lower gas prices by 18 cents a gallon immediately. I've also proposed suspending the federal diesel tax, because when the price of diesel goes up, the price of everything goes up, because that's how all of our goods are shipped and how they're transported. And right after I did that, President Trump came out in support of suspending those two federal taxes. And so I think what Texans are looking for are leaders who are going to fight for them, who are going to focus on reducing costs, focus on unrigging this economy so that it works for regular people again. And that's what we're going to be focused on for the rest of this campaign. Ken Paxton embodies this corrupt, rigged system, and we're going to build a movement to unrig it on behalf of the people of Texas.
You're going to have to get Lloyd Benson's old seat on the Senate Finance Committee to be in a strong position to get those fuel taxes suspended. That's where the action is on that one. Right. As you know, and I'm sure you know, and I'm sure you've talked to them, there are some John Cornyn voters out there tonight who are gravely disappointed and would have a difficult time trying to cast a vote for Ken Paxton in November, but they are Republicans and they vote Republican. What do you have to say to those Cornyn voters tonight who are so disappointed with this outcome on the Republican side in Texas tonight?
Well, first, I want to thank Senator Cornyn for his many years representing the state of Texas in our nation's capital. He and I don't agree on everything, but we both still believe in public service. The idea that these positions of public trust are meant to be a service to our constituents. And so to Senator Cornyn's supporters, I know you're feeling disappointed tonight, but I want you to know that you have a place in our campaign. This movement we're building is bigger than any political party. It's bigger than partisanship. It's about service versus selfishness. It is about serving the people of this state, improving people's lives through public policy. And so I would welcome any of the senator's supporters to join us this evening as we embark on this journey to take back our state and take back our country from corrupt politicians like Ken Paxton.
You know, there are so many millions of voters around this country tonight in states that have never voted for Donald Trump. Big states, New York, California, Illinois, all over the country, Massachusetts and so forth, who are staring at Texas wondering how could they possibly choose Ken Paxton over John Cornyn. John Cornyn, a solid Republican who's done everything that solid Republicans do, a Trump-supporting Republican. Ken Paxton, indicted, impeached, caught having affairs, a stunning personal biography for a politician to have, and not just survive an election, but win big on the Republican side of the ballot in Texas tonight. There are people out there in the country staring at Texas, just wondering how that could possibly happen.
Well, I just want to remind those folks around the country that our campaign is leading in every public and private poll that we've seen against Ken Paxton. And so I think there's going to be a backlash to this extremism and this corruption that Ken Paxton embodies. I think you're going to see those old-fashioned values of honesty, integrity, and service make a comeback in this election, in this state, in this race. And I urge anyone watching to join us and help us make this possible, because this is not just about Texas. This is about whether or not we can transform this broken, corrupt political system. And it's going to take all of us joining together to make that possible. And so I feel confident. I feel it in my bones that we are going to win this race in Texas, and we're going to transform this broken system in this country.
James Tallarico, you joined us here on the program for the first time before you won the Democratic nomination. Then you joined us immediately after winning the Democratic nomination. But tonight feels like the first real night of this campaign. It is James Tallarico versus Ken Paxton in Texas. Thank you very much for starting off that campaign here tonight.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And coming up, will the defeated Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn become the next Republican senator who might vote against Donald Trump's war? That's next. Donald Trump did not attend his oldest son's second wedding this weekend in the Bahamas. Donald Trump's RSVP excuse for not attending his son's second wedding was that he had to stay in the White House and conduct telephone negotiations to end his war in Iran, which he very much failed to do. Yesterday at 8:23 a.m., Donald Trump posted this on social media: "Negotiations with the Islamic Republic of Iran are proceeding nicely!" exclamation point. And then U.S. Central Command put out this statement: U.S. forces conducted self-defense strikes in southern Iran today to protect our troops from threats posed by Iranian forces. Targets included missile launch sites and Iranian boats attempting to emplace mines. That's not the kind of thing that happens when peace negotiations are proceeding nicely, as Donald Trump would put it. The House of Representatives is now in recess, which the Speaker of the House started a bit early last week, to avoid a vote on Donald Trump's war, when the Speaker reportedly knew he did not have enough votes to win support for Donald Trump's war in the Republican-controlled House of Representatives. Joining us now is Congressman Adam Smith of the state of Washington, is the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman Smith, might it be the case that the House and the Senate have to stay out of session in order to avoid Donald Trump losing a war powers vote in both the House and the Senate at this point?
Yeah, well, he already lost the one in the Senate. So in the House, it's a tougher call The reason that they canceled the vote last week was because there were Republican members absent. I have not yet seen Republican House members that have changed their mind. They should, obviously. The war has been a disaster and is very unpopular. But House Republicans have been sycophants to Donald Trump, first, last, and always. So we're going to have to keep the pressure up to get them to change their mind. But we'll find out, because we're coming back into session a week from today, actually, and we'll have that vote. And it certainly should be a vote to end this war.
We just showed that poll with James Tallarico in Texas, University of Texas poll showing Texas opposition to Donald Trump's war in Iran. If that's where Texas is polling, then these Republicans are not going to be coming back from very many of their districts with an awful lot of support for this war.
Yeah, they're clearly on the wrong side of the issue. Now, I would like to ask that 37%, what exactly is it that they see here? This war has been manifestly a disaster for this country. The costs have been enormous. We've lost 14 service members, hundreds wounded, thousands of civilians killed. It's devastated the global economy, skyrocketed gas prices, amongst other things here locally. But then we've also not accomplished anything. Iran is now being run by someone more hardline and more extreme than when the war began. They're dug in deeper. We've accomplished none of our goals, and now the Strait of Hormuz is basically under Iranian control, and they're negotiating how much we and the rest of the world are going to have to pay them to open it up. Look, I mean, loyalty to Trump, I guess, explains that number, but I hope people get past loyalty to Trump and start looking at the impacts, the costs of Donald Trump's policies on the American people. And I think that pressure is mounting.
Congressman Adam Smith, thank you very much for joining our coverage tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
And coming up, President Obama was in Texas earlier this month to campaign for James Tallarico and will surely be going back to do that again. Ben Rhodes, who served as President Obama's Deputy National Security Advisor and speechwriter, will join us next. On the night James Tallarico won Texas Democratic nomination for the United States Senate, he said this.
There is something happening in Texas. The people of this state have given this country a little bit of hope. And a little bit of hope is a dangerous thing. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what happens in this Republican runoff. We already know who we're running against. The billionaire mega donors and their corrupt political system. Not any one politician, not any one political party. We are running against the broken system and the powerful people who broke it.
President Barack Obama recently campaigned with James Tallarico in Texas.
When I was a student here at the University of Texas, I registered voters for the campaign of then Senator Barack Obama.
Now I'm here at UT campaigning to send James Tallarico to the United States Senate. He's building a movement by bringing neighbors together. In this era of division, a new politics is being born right here in Texas.
Ben Rhodes, an Obama speechwriter and former Deputy National Security Advisor, has published a new book titled All We Say, The Battle for American Identity, A History in 15 Speeches. The 15 extraordinary speeches include, of course, presidential speeches and speeches for Martin Luther King Jr. and Benjamin Franklin, as well as a 1966 speech on the steps of the California State Capitol by Dolores Huerta, one of the leaders of the National Farm Workers who were protesting the exploitation of farm workers in California and around the country. Dolores Huerta, who today, at age 96, is still an activist leader and at times a protester, said in that speech 60 years ago, the social and economic revolution of the farm workers is well underway, and it will not be stopped until we receive equality. The farm workers are moving. Nothing is going to stop them. The workers are crying for organization, and we are going to organize them. We may act in strange and unusual ways in our organizing, but we're willing to try new and unused methods to achieve justice for the farm workers. In his book, Ben Rhodes writes, "By the time I went to work for a Democratic presidential candidate, Barack Obama's rallying cry was, 'Yes, we can,' a direct quote of the slogan that Dolores Huerta had coined for the farm workers decades ago. Si se puede." Joining us now is Ben Rhodes, former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama and MS Now political and national security analyst. His new book is All We Say, The Battle for American Identity, A History in 15 Speeches. It is published today. Ben, thank you very much for joining us tonight. So struck by so much in your book and your writing about inspirational speakers, and in your New York Times piece about this, you've linked James Tallarico into this group of inspirational speakers who have really moved the way we see things and changed the way we see things.
Yeah, Lawrence, I think there are a couple things to this. First of all, we're so trapped in the present with Donald Trump. We're so trapped in the day-to-day drama that we can forget that we exist in a continuum. The reason I went into history in 250 years is because you find those connective threads that so often live on through speeches, as I pointed out in the synergy between Dolores Huerta's activism and Barack Obama's campaign. But also, more importantly, when you go back and you look at how the best people have done it, there's a moral language that they use. It's not just about policy. That's important. It's incredibly important. But the policy has to flow from what your moral vision for this country and its identity is. FDR, just to take a few people on my book, FDR didn't just talk about a program. He talked about 4 fundamental freedoms that defined America. Martin Luther King did not just talk about the need to dismantle segregation. He talked about his dream of a multiracial America where black children and white children could be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Barack Obama talked about, I am my brother's keeper. I am my sister's keeper. These are ideals and values that then inform the policy vision that they have. And I think one thing that Democrats have kind of lost in this Trump era is we're so angry about Trump, or we're trying to find the right formulation about middle-class economics, that we forget to make it about something bigger. Politics at its best, particularly in the Democratic Party, is about something bigger. And so when I hear James Tallarico on the stump talking about how his Christian faith compels him to care for his neighbor, or even talking to you, Lawrence, about values of integrity and service and honesty, those are things that people of different political persuasions can get behind, and they're things that we badly, badly need to counter-program what Donald Trump is doing to this nation.
I think when people think, oh, it's a book about a collection of speeches, well, it's a lot more than that, because you give us an awful lot of your own written analysis about it in addition to the speeches. But they are just not the speeches you expect. I sort of had in my head an expectation of what these speeches would be. It's not what they are. One thing that I find that does link them, and by the way, totally fascinated by the linking threads of a 1966 speech by Dolores Huerta to Barack Obama in the 21st century. There's a lot of that in the book, because all of these speakers are optimists. That's the one thing that they all share in their time. Benjamin Franklin, an optimist for this country. Martin Luther King, a realist, knowing how hard the battle was that he was in, but always an optimist. Dolores Huerta, always an optimist. To this day, an optimist. And these are people who knew they were in very long-term struggles. They knew they weren't going to have a victory in a couple of months that was going to settle things and they could relax.
That's right, and thank you for pointing that out. It's not an anthology. In each chapter, what I do is I describe the distinct circumstances that produced these words. What was the life story of the person that allowed them to give that speech? Importantly, what movement did they either come out of or did they build in order to deliver that speech? And I think there's something very specifically American, Lawrence, about that idea of what you just spoke about, to really persuade people, right? Because the best speeches, the most consequential ones, they either mobilize and persuade. To do that, you're not just telling people what you believe, you're telling people why you believe it. And you're asking them to take a chance on hope. You're asking them to believe in a future vision that might seem really hard to attain. I mean, Frederick Douglass, at the height of slavery, speaking about a multiracial future of abolition and multiracial democracy. That is someone literally trying to speak history into being, knowing that he's not going to see the full fulfillment of his vision, in the same way that King was not going to see the full fulfillment of his dream. In the same way that Dolores Huerta, on the steps of that Capitol, didn't just talk about collective bargaining rights and the workers' agenda. She said, we are here. We had marched from Delano, California, all the way to Sacramento, hundreds of miles, and she's standing there and says, we embody our needs to you. We demand to be seen, is what she's saying. And I had Ronald Reagan, too, who also spoke his way into the presidency and built a movement in similar ways. So you can do this from different ideological persuasions. We need to get back to that kind of storytelling, political storytelling. And I see it in people like Tallarico, John Ossoff, even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Some of the younger Democrats are kind of beginning to find a language that looks beyond Donald Trump. And I think they will be benefited by looking back and seeing how people have done this in the past, because they're taking the baton from some giants who were activists and politicians before them.
Yeah, and one of the characteristics of the people in this book with these speeches is that they all know or knew who they are. They didn't have to find out what to say from someone walking in with talking points. That's not the way it worked for Franklin Roosevelt. These are people who, you know, obviously Ronald Reagan had speechwriters, but he also had core beliefs that were very clear that began before he became a political candidate. And that's true of all of the people that you write about and the people you've written about in the Times. Who are in the present-day practice of this. They're all people who seem to wake up in the morning knowing who they are, and they don't need the speechwriters to tell them.
They knew what they believed. I mean, FDR was just extraordinary to spend time with him. And, you know, the Four Freedoms speech was delivered in 1941. He'd just been reelected. It's the darkest hour. Germany has conquered France. The war looks bad. He's got to convince an isolationist Congress to provide a blank check of support to Britain and probably to get in the war. He had a draft of his speech. Something was missing. He called in the speechwriters the night before and he said, I have an idea for an ending. I want to go with this concept of four freedoms. What is this? Because it's not enough to tell people what my program is. I have to tell them why they have to make sacrifices, what this nation is all about. He knew intuitively what it was, and he spoke that into being.
Ben Rhodes' wonderful new book is All We Say, The Battle for American Identity, A History in 15 Speeches. Ben, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We'll be right back. That's tonight's last word. The 11th hour with Stephanie Ruhle starts now.
Here we go, boys and girls. Good evening once again. I am Stephanie Ruhle. We are now 161 days away from the midterms, and tonight is one of the biggest primaries of all. It is the Republican Senate runoff in the state of Texas between incumbent Senator John Cornyn and challenger Ken Paxton. And it turned out to be not very much of a race at all. Paxton is officially projected to win with more than 63% of the vote. Cornyn, a mainstream Republican who is seeking his fifth term against State Attorney General Ken Paxton, a diehard MAGA candidate with a history, and I'm saying this in the most PG version imaginable, a history of scandals. In the final days of the race, President Donald Trump enthusiastically endorsed Paxton. The winner will now face Democratic nominee James Tallarico, who is seen as a rising star in the party. In the last hour, Tallarico spoke with our colleague Lawrence O'Donnell about the race. Watch this.
Ken Paxton embodies the broken political system that we're running against. He is the most corrupt politician in America. 3 years ago tomorrow, he was impeached by his own party for using his public office, his position of public trust, to enrich himself and his donors at our expense. And that is exactly the problem in our politics. It's puppet politicians who serve themselves and their billionaire mega donors instead of serving us. It's why we can't afford anything. It's why we can't get ahead no matter how hard we work. The system is rigged by corrupt politicians like Ken Paxton.
I want to bring in my friend Ali Velshi, chief data correspondent here at MS Now, host of the show Velshi. In the very near future, he will be host of the 11th Hour, but it will be in the month of June, where he will hopefully no longer be wearing a winter vest. Ali, what are you seeing in the results for this huge race? And I'd like to point out to our audience,
I'm off by a week on Memorial Day.
I asked Ali about the vest, and he said to me moments ago, at least it's not Memorial Day yet. So you know what? Trust him in what he's going to tell you next.
Don't worry about the data I'm about to show you. All right, here's the interesting thing. Ken Paxton wins, 78% of the vote in. Hasn't really moved, though, in terms of the percentages, 64% to 36%. Here's the interesting thing. In March, this is a runoff state, so you have to have 50% of the vote. In March, John Cornyn was the lead vote getter at 42%. If you take the 40.5% that Ken Paxton got then, and you add the 13.5% that Wesley Hunt, who is a very Trumpy congressman, who was also running, you should have gotten to 54% versus 42%. Take a look at what happened. 64. So Ken Paxton got not only all the votes that Wesley Hunt got, but yet more, which is the nature of primary runoffs. This is, by the way, considered a win by a lot of Democrats. And let me explain that to you. And that is because James Tallarico won outright. He got more than 50% of the vote in March. But let me tell you where Tallarico did well and where he's got to do well if this fever dream of Democrats taking a state seat is going to happen again. Lloyd Bentsen was the last time a U.S. Senator, a Democrat, won the U.S. Senate seat in 1998. There were Democrats statewide until 1998, but it's been a long time. Okay, so there are 4 counties here. These are called the Rio Grande Valley counties. James Tallarico has done very well there among Latino, Hispanic voters who have shifted. They had shifted to Donald Trump. They're shifting back all along the Rio Grande. That's an opportunity for him. Then there's the Austin-San Antonio corridor, which he did very, very well in. As you can see, he won all of those in the primaries. He didn't win the Houston area, except for one particular county here, but those were all Democratic votes. They went to Jasmine Crockett, so he's got an opportunity here. And then he's got the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Again, this is Jasmine Crockett's backyard. If he can motivate those voters, Jasmine Crockett got a lot of new voters, including a lot of black voters, out to vote for her. Will they come out and vote for James Tallarico? If all of that combined with a pretty rough candidate in Ken Paxton comes to pass, it could be in for an interesting night in November. I want to show you a couple of districts in House districts where we had primaries in Texas. District 33 was Colin Allred. He used to be the House member. He resigned when he ran against Ted Cruz for the Senate. He was succeeded by Julie Johnson, who's technically the incumbent. She has now lost that. Colin Allred will go back into the election as the Democratic candidate in District 33. And over here in Houston, I want to show you District 18. This is Christian Menefee. He's 38 years old. Al Green, 78 years old. They are both progressives. Al Green's basically his district got redistricted out, so it was much more of Christian Menefee's district, but he's only been in Congress since the beginning of this year. Very clear victory for him. He is going forward as a Democratic candidate. Again, 2 progressive candidates. There's some crypto money involved in here, but 2 progressive candidates going up against each other, the younger generation beating the older generation. So once again, I would say overall, while most of the attention tonight, Stephanie, was on the Republican side of the primary, the energy might be on the Democratic side of the primary, because when you do the math, if you're James Tallarico, you're probably by a percentage or so ahead of where you were this morning.
And to be clear, Ali, north, south, east, west, rural, urban, suburban, if there is an election, there will be crypto money in there. Stay with us, Ali. I want to get smarter with the help of our leadoff panel and bring in Texas native Abby Livingston, congressional correspondent for Puck News, and Larry Sabato, director at the Center for Politics, a UVA professor and presidential historian, UVA, which hosted the NCAA lacrosse championships this weekend, where the Princeton Tigers were victorious. Abby, you are a Texan. Hopefully your parents are watching. You know politics, especially in the age of Trump. What is your reaction tonight?
Well, my mother is for sure watching. She's one of your biggest fans. I'm stunned with the margin. I mean, we're looking at almost 30 points, and I don't think many folks in Texas saw that actually coming. They thought, I mean, there were some scenarios where people thought Cornyn could win. This is a rout. I'm from Texas. We would call it John Cornyn got whipped. This is just a very, very dramatic night in Texas politics. I think the central question that is not obvious in this is John Cornyn is the lifeline of money leaving Texas, donor money going to other senators. So now Republicans have a money pit problem. John Cornyn is no longer there to serve that purpose. But on top of that, this Senate race has cost over $100 million just in the runoff.
And who are these people donating? Are they Texans?
Yeah, so it's the old Bush network, the old federal. They're not the right-wing billionaires who donate hundreds of millions of dollars. This is like the bundler types. And so John Cornyn so it's not just that the money's not going out. Republicans are now looking in the face of a very serious problem of money needing to come in because Ken Paxton is not a good fundraiser and James Tallarico is. So at some point, Republicans may have to start making choices about cutting money elsewhere to save the Texas seat.
Larry, how does this affect the big picture for control of the Senate?
Well, if Democrats could win Texas, they'd be well on the road to taking over the Senate, because winning Texas is not just winning Texas, as big as that is. It suggests that there is a sizable blue wave, and that blue wave would carry over, I would think, to Iowa and Ohio and possibly other states, certainly Maine, North Carolina. It would be enough for Democrats to get at least a nominal majority. One thing that I think is important to remember, though, turnout declined pretty dramatically, which is the norm for a runoff election. But that is part of the calculation here. It's one reason why, in the end, Paxton got such a large percentage, much more than most people had expected, although some private polls did show Paxton around 60%. So it's lower turnout in the runoff. Of course, that's not a good sign either if you lack the enthusiasm that you need to carry a nominee forward to November.
Allie, when you look at the numbers, how much did the Trump endorsement affect this race?
It was wild. It was really wild. I'm going to take a look at Dallas County. Okay, let's go back to the March the primaries. John Cornyn had an 18,000 vote lead in Harris County in Dallas. Go to this race here, 61% of the vote in there. He's got a 900 vote lead. I mean, the Cornyn vote collapsed across Texas. Larry's point is correct. Runoff votes are not only a smaller turnout, they tend to be a more extreme part of any party. So you're going to see exaggerations in the vote. But this was a collapse. I mean, John Cornyn wasn't some random guy running for Senate. This is a multi-term senator who is not thought of as being on the far right of his own party. So this is a very tricky situation because the type of voters who show up for primary votes supported a guy like Ken Paxton, who you've described has a lot of baggage. He's an albatross. Didn't matter. The voters who supported Ken Paxton may not be having their mind on whether there's a Democratic path to victory in the United States Senate. They may have just helped James Tallarico and the Democrats achieve that because they got the guy they wanted. John Cornyn went sideways against Donald Trump. We saw this with Tom Tillis. We saw this with Cassidy. We saw this with those state senators in Indiana. Donald Trump has 100% of control over the 35 or 36 or 37% of Republicans who support him. But this is the kind of thing that may work on a primary night and may not work on a midterm election night.
That's exactly what I want to get to. Abby, you know, I'm moving in a few weeks to the morning. So I've been studying morning television for the last few months. And just last week, I was watching Fox and Friends, where a host was talking about Cornyn and Paxton and said, I sense the worst is yet to come about his background. Talking about Paxton, a Fox News host. How much frustration is there with Texas Republicans right now over this last-minute Paxton endorsement from Trump? How much does this scramble their game?
Well, I was talking to Republican operatives who are pro-Cornyn 30 minutes after the endorsement came down last week, and they were already day drinking. So that was
I thought you were saying daydreaming. I had that wrong. That was wrong, Allie. Day drinking. There you go.
But
two very different things.
My sense was from talking to sources over the last week was that Cornyn's polling was collapsing in light of this. But the frustration isn't with that. It was that Donald Trump did not endorse Cornyn just a week after the election, when there were credible reports saying that Donald Trump was about to endorse John Cornyn, and that was his only window to the nomination if that had happened in that moment. And for it to have been drug out so long, so much money being spent, and then the death blow came a week before the election. It was just an extraordinary
week. But like for real, Shame on them. Shame on them. Did they meet Donald Trump yesterday? When has he, I mean, the whole like Willy, like his whole game is I'm going to play The Apprentice, and at the very last second, you have no idea who I'm going to say you're fired to. So come on.
I just think it's indicative that John Cornyn never had control of this race, and he's always been a stable, credible campaigner statewide, and this was just never the path that was. It was just so out of his control.
Larry, let's say Ken Paxton wins. What does Paxton in the Senate look like? What does it mean for Republicans in Congress?
Well, I think they'll very quickly start giving him the wrong time and place for Senate.
Oh my God!
On the Republican caucus. And I'm asserting that on biblical grounds, Stephanie. I think that there's a lot to Paxton's history that would suggest that he's going to be an extreme outsider in the Senate, not just in his voting pattern, but in the way he mixes with other senators. They're dreading it. First of all, they're furious at Trump for doing this. I don't know how much of it was Trump in the end, because, again, that lower turnout meant, as Ali was saying, it was a more pure, extreme Republican electorate. And go on social media tonight. They're going crazy about the rhinos. They're listing all the other rhino Republicans in the Senate that they're going after now, from John Thune on down. So they're loaded for bear, and that's not the practice of most of those rhinos, supposed rhinos in the Republican caucus in the Senate. But I do think that they're going to isolate Ken Paxton to the extent they can if he gets in the Senate.
Yeah, well, then I guess over the next 6 months, we should be paying attention to those supposed rhinos while they're getting attacked. Let's see what they're going to actually do, whether it's Trump's budget for the ballroom or how he's continuing the war with Iran. We also saw a couple of redistricting setbacks for Trump Republicans today. A federal court blocked Alabama's Republican-drawn map, and the Republican-led South Carolina State Senate again rejected a map that would have carved up Jim Clyburn's district. What are you hearing on the Hill today? That's big news for Jim Clyburn.
It's big news for Jim Clyburn. It's big news for the Democratic Party, because that still keeps him in the position as kingmaker.
Why would they do that?
The reason the undertold story of redistricting is how much down ballot Republicans hate this. And so you get
explain.
So you have a Republican congressperson in South Carolina, and their district is redrawn. It may still be safe Republican, but they have a lot of new voters. That makes them vulnerable in a primary, and then Trump could come in and endorse against them, and then they suddenly lost re-election. And then you've got the dummy mander issue, where maybe the dummy mander, it will backfire. Sorry, I'm doing too inside the weeds. It backfires, where maybe Republicans wanted to do a full sweep of South Carolina by taking out Clyburn, but you spread the Republicans too thin, and you may start having incumbents lose in the general election to Democrats because you've just gone too far.
Larry, it now seems like we're going to enter this endless cycle of extreme gerrymandering, where in many cases, all districts in a state are going to go for one party. Congress, I know I sound naive, is supposed to be about true local representation. Where is this cycle going to take us?
Well, it's going to take us no place good. It will increase the polarization and extreme partisanship that we've seen. You know, if you're going to, at the end of Trump's presidency, whenever that is, list the bad things he's done, and it's a long list, you must include redistricting. Eternal redistricting, because we're going to have it every single year in any state that changes and has one party take over the legislature entirely and control the governorship as well. Redistricting is horrible if done only once every 10 years. It causes lots of hard feelings and all kinds of electoral ramifications as well. If you're doing it every year, every other year, every 3 years, or even twice a decade, it's going to double, triple, quadruple the bad feelings that make it more difficult to get anything done and to make compromise a part of the process, which has been the American genius all along.
Ali, beyond frustrating or beyond bad feelings, how challenging will this be for pollsters, for data scientists, for fundraisers, all of it.
I think the point that Abby was making was really interesting about South Carolina. South Carolina currently is 6 Republicans to 1 Democrat in terms of federal seats. The aim of this redistricting effort was to make it 7-0. The leader of the Senate in South Carolina said, you are going to annoy people so much that you might go from 6 to 1 instead of 7-0. You might go to 5-2. I think what we have not anticipated is the degree to which regular people, whether they consider themselves conservatives or liberals, progressives or conservatives, do not think this system is fair, and it's getting less and less fair. So as much as the math is done and the people who do this redistricting really figure it out and they really think they're going to win more seats, I think you may see something else, particularly with the end of the Voting Rights Act, the gutting of the Voting Rights Act in Louisiana versus Calais, and the feeling that a lot of black people who are still alive remember about the fights that led up to the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act in 1964 and 1965. I think you are going to see a groundswell movement like the ones we saw last year after Doge, like the ones we saw after the invasions by the federal agents of Minneapolis. I think you're going to start to see a groundswell movement to say, don't wreck our politics, because once you remove the agency, there are lots of countries where people still vote. Iran is one of them. Russia is one of them. People still cast a ballot, but the ballot means virtually nothing. We are approaching a place in America where, for some people, the ballot will mean nothing. And this might be your chance between now and November to have enough influence to say, not only will I keep my vote, but my vote will still have meaning.
Listen to Ali Velshi when he's at the big board. I realize he looks like he's there to tell you the weather, and then you're confused because he's in that winter vest. But no, he's here for the data, and he's the best at it. Ali Velshi, Abby Livingston, Larry Sabato, thank you so much. Coming up later in the program, we're talking about my favorite, Pope Leo. He warns about the dangers of AI, calling for the technology to be disarmed. But first, right after the break, the U.S. says defensive strikes were launched in southern Iran. We're going to get into what it means for peace talks and the already fragile ceasefire. The 11th hour just getting underway on a Tuesday night.